39.
2 years ago, so
Okay, members, we're really forward. The members of the meeting is now open. Can I formally welcome everyone to the committee this morning. The usual housekeeping, could I remind members about the protocols around the use of their electronic tablets, and if everyone in the room could switch off their mobile and other electronic devices, please. We ask that any member with any interest relevant to today's agenda to declare that. Undeclared, then move on to the next item, which apologies. I've an apology from Paula Bradley. Any other apologies to declare? Take note. Moving on then to the draft minutes. It's on page 5 of your pack. The minutes of the 29th of May 2014. Members content for the draft minutes to be adopted for accuracy. Take that as a yes. Okay, thank you. Moving on then to the next item, Chairperson, business item number 3. Just to note that the regular business will be dealt with this morning as we have agreed. Then the committee will break for lunch at 1 p.m. and reconvene at 1:30 in room 21. And that's to take evidence for phase 2 of the inquiry. We're taking the evidence this afternoon from the Chair of the Housing Executive and the Chair of the Housing Executive Audit Committee. Obviously there's a number of briefings here, and there's a number of the SRs, subordinate legislation and so on, to be dealt with this morning. So we'll try and expedite the business this morning. Facilitate the evidence session in the afternoon. Okay. Just matters arising then, just to refer members to page 4 of your tabled items. The Department has written to update the committee on the current status of negotiations between the housing side of the contractors regarding overpayments. Just to note that the committee has been informed that the parties have reached a position where it's anticipated this matter will be resolved by agreement. What that means that has previously been indicated to the committee that agreement had already been reached. You will recall we were advised that agreement had been reached, and this was currently being assessed by DST and DFP. So I'm not actually quite sure what the correspondence tells us this morning, to be quite frank. It was clearly our understanding that an agreement had been reached between the contractors and the housing executive. But I've been told that the parties, inverted commas, have reached a position where it is anticipated that this matter will be resolved by agreement. I have no idea what that means.
Chairman, could I just, could we also maybe contact the Department of Finance and Personnel? My understanding is that the business case has now gone to DFP, but the promise was given to the contractors that this would be settled by June, and given the perilous financial position that many have been put in because of the allegations that were made about how much was owed and the impact that had on creditors, bankers, etc., that promise that money would be paid to them by June, because monies are owed, now seems to be moving away, which puts in place uncertainty again. So if the business case has gone to DFP, then I think that we ought to be making the strongest representation to the Finance Department that this should be dealt with quickly, so that the promise that was made to businesses which are under financial pressure now can be honoured.
Yeah.
Sure, and I agree with what Sammy has said, but I would also like to just add another wee piece to that jigsaw, and that is we're running very close until recess, and I'm just concerned that they're trying to draw this out until recess. That would leave us, at least for a couple of months, with nothing to say, and I think we need to be, if we can, be as hard as possible to ensure that we're getting not only conclusion to this, but the information we
Yeah, if Sammy's right, and I assume he is, that the business case has gone to DFP,
that surely is on the premise that there has been an agreement. Yet this letter, if that is so, is misleading us, because it's suggesting to us that agreement is anticipated but not yet reached. You can't send a business case, I would have thought, unless you have an agreement.
Well, I assume, Jim, the answer to that would be that if the business case was rejected by DFP, then the agreement would not have been reached because the agreement could not be honoured. I think that was my interpretation of that. Because the final piece of the jigsaw is to get DFP approval for the business case which is submitted by the Housing Executive or DSC.
I think
Why could they simply not have told us the business case is going to DFP? Like, we're getting that information not from the department, but from a committee member, whereas the department should be being upfront and telling us that.
I mean, I have a number of concerns, and I think, first of all, the committee has been very patient in this matter, and yes, the issue was subject to negotiations, and they were complicated, I presume, and drawn out, and that's fair enough to get the right, proper outcome, whatever that would be. But the committee has been routinely reported to from senior officials that this matter is at the point of closure. We're going to resolve it today. It'll be finished by this afternoon. It'll be wound up tomorrow. Blah blah blah. We were recently advised that the negotiations had concluded and the case was going for ratification, if you like, by DST and DFP. I have further concerns in that the Minister of Finance last week in the House basically said that that was not the case, said that the matter was still ongoing.
Well, mind you, that would have been, I'm imagining, reading off a departmental briefing for something that wasn't his, and that's in keeping with the kind of ambiguity that there is in the letter.
Well, the Minister of Finance last week was standing in for the Minister for DSD, so I certainly wasn't happy in the race of a clerk just to pursue that, because I don't want this, nobody in this room wants this thing to be prolonged. Nobody wants it to be anybody digging any deeper. Big concern everybody has here is that we were told here by Andre, I think a week or so ago, that these maintenance contracts will not be reissued again to autumn. That means there's a very strong likelihood of one or other of these companies going to wall. Yeah. And I just think it has to be unacceptable that this thing is just been strung out the way in which it appears to be, moving backwards according to this, albeit an ambiguous kind of letter.
Chairman, see, rather than write to them, why don't we demand that they come to our next meeting next week to answer the questions about that? I mean, I don't think there's any harm in also writing to the DFP to explain our concerns this be dealt with as quickly as possible. But I think we should have the Housing Executive along here as well.
Well, can we ask the chairman this afternoon?
We could serve notice on them if we want to, yeah. We can try and contact them, although they're here for the inquiry, so just want to make sure we don't cross-contaminate the business of the committee or the inquiry. But we can, given the urgency of this, inform the chair that we may want to, we would like to get an answer from this today. Just to further technical end of your request there, Sammy, we're not doing a meeting next Thursday as already agreed, but we can still say we want to have them here at our next meeting, but we want an urgent resolution to this matter, feeling that we still want them here at the next meeting then.
Chairman, just on that, it would be important to impress upon them that our next meeting is a fortnight from today.
Yeah.
And we are then, at that point, getting very close to the recess.
Yeah. Well, I think the committee is putting on record, I mean, the consensus of the room here today is people are clearly very frustrated about this and they want this dealt with urgently. And we are, I think, fair to say that encapsulated that we're quite concerned that the way in which this has been reported to us. On the one hand, it's supposed to be dealt with, sorted out, just to be ratified, and then we're now told actually it may not be. That's just really not good enough. And it's gone on, I think everybody's agreed, far too long. Okay.
Is there a possibility of just taking into consideration the time limitation that we have in terms of recess, that the committee asked for a meeting with senior officials the Monday or Tuesday of next week? Most of us will be about the house anyway. because the longer it goes back, the less likelihood is that you will be told of any resolution to this thing until September.
Well, we could try and do that, which may be an ad hoc arrangement, possibly on Tuesday, back end or front end of the inquiry session. If we can try and do that, if members can try, we try and expedite this. Okay, I think that sends out a very clear message that we want this resolved. Okay, members, so thank you for that. Moving on then to the next item under matters arising then, just, pardon me, that the Employment and Learning Committee requested ourselves to comment on the Work and Families Bill, particularly in clauses relating to maternity allowance and social security law. The deadline for response is the 23rd of June. No members have so far indicated that they have any desire to make a comment by the 19th of June. So we can issue a nil response if that's the case, and just draw this to people's attention. So I mean, there's still time to come back to it if people want to just refresh their memory on it. Okay. And again, or just to say that in terms of additional meetings, I think just in terms of the schedule that we have before the recess, I mean, people are anxious to kind of make sure we catch up with any outstanding business. So can I just say, look, we've agreed, as you know, to do a meeting next Tuesday in lieu of the fact that members are away. I think it's 12:30, is it?
Chair, it was, the meeting was requested that'll be at lunchtime, so lunchtime on Tuesday, so in between the end of the first morning session.
What time is that? 12:30?
12:30 or 12:30 until.
Isn't it 12:30?
Yeah.
And that was
An hour and a half.
And that was the day with the kind of do a round-up on the phase one of the inquiry, hopefully. We didn't have a meeting scheduled for Thursday, so maybe because of the conferences on and other people had made alternative arrangements and so on, so it's probably unlikely, certainly difficult probably to get people back on the Thursday. But if needs be, can we just make sure that we're aware that, and we can decide this next week. But for example, you may want to, in terms of, because we do want to expedite aspects of the inquiry before the side of the summer recess, that we might then need to reconvene even possibly the following Tuesday, as again as part of that wind-up session.
There was something
That would be an additional meeting as well as an incoming Thursday.
There's something in the schedule about a possible meeting at Thursday afternoon. Is that not happening?
Well, we kind of took a sounding last week, and I mean, I'm easy in that myself, but we took a sounding last week of people who were going to the housing conference, but then on that basis, people that had then rescheduled other activities themselves, if you know what I mean. So it's unlikely that we'll get a full complement or nearly a full complement of the committee members. So that's why I say, if we have a rollover from next Tuesday, then yourselves will stand by to reconvene on the following Tuesday.
Yeah, just the forthcoming Tuesday meeting, it said was to wrap up phase one, which was right. But my understanding of our meeting last week was that it wasn't just to do that, it was also to spell out specifically the timeline to the end of the inquiry as well.
Yeah, if that's incentive, and if we can do that, then excellent. If not, we'll roll over then the following Tuesday and get it, because we're still there well within time, because that means that we can agree how we're going to conduct the final phase of it. Particularly because I think it's crucial that we make sure that we schedule before the summer recess the witnesses and the evidence sessions, so that they're well notified and well in advance, so all within procedural fairness, everybody's been given all of the appropriate time. Sorry, Stephen.
Just that meeting on Tuesday is scheduled to start at midday, and there's lunch provided as well. So with it being a closed session, there'll be lunch at the meeting.
So midday is
On Tuesday.
12?
Yeah.
It's not 12:30 then?
That's okay.
All right, okay, members, have it at 12 o'clock. Okay, thank you for that, Catherine. Okay, you'll note the additional tabled items are in your pack. A letter's been received in the department regarding the Quality Commission's investigation into what's described as potential failures by the DSE to comply with the approved equality scheme in connection with Housing Strategy 2012 to 17. The Department have asked that the committee provides it with any information that holds relevant to this investigation. So, just to let people know that's in your pack. The Quality Commission had written the committee on the 14th of May informing it that this investigation is going ahead. If members are content, then we could ask our officials here to forward any information relevant to the investigation to the department. And this is really principally corresponds from the Equality Commission and rather Equality Coalition, which had written to the committee expressing a number of concerns. The members content then and will forward that to the department. We'll keep the committee informed of all back and forth correspondence. An ETI event, remind members that there's a ETI committee are holding a workshop in the Lawn Gallery in the morning of Tuesday the 10th of June about energy efficiency. It's just to let people know there that's on, and if anybody's interested in attending, if you might let the staff and officials know. Okay, so moving on then from matters arising, moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 5, and that's the Regeneration Housing Bill. It's a pre-introduction, it's a departmental briefing, and could I then formally welcome Henry McCardle, Stephen Martin and Alison Chambers then to the committee this morning. Just to remind members then that the Minister intends to bring the Regeneration Housing Bill to the Assembly for introduction before the summer recess. And this is a pre-realised state of briefing. So without any further ado, Henry, Stephen and Alison, if want to take the members through your presentation, and then we'll take responses from members.
Okay, good morning, Chairman and members of the committee, and thanks for this opportunity to brief the committee on the draft Regeneration Housing Bill. Members will already receive written briefing, as well as a copy of the draft bill and an explanatory memorandum. To set some context for this, you may be aware that the DOE's Local Government Act Northern Ireland 2014 received royal assent on the 12th of May. The Local Government Act provides for a reformed and strengthened local government system with 11 new councils and a range of new and enhanced functions. It's in this context that DSD will be transferring or conferring a range of functions, powers and responsibilities on councils from April 2015. The package of functions transferring to councils was agreed by the Executive in April 2013. And for DSD, this is exactly the same package as was proposed for transfer in 2011, with the exception of energy efficiency, which had already gone to councils. So in summary, the draft bill, which contains 27 clauses and 5 schedules, will provide for the following to go from DSD to the councils. Powers in relation to social need. For example, power to provide financial assistance to third parties which will benefit areas of social need. Power to carry out works for the improvement of the environment, such as public realm schemes, and power to support community development. The bill will also include development powers and other powers for planning purposes, including powers to acquire land either by agreement or through vesting, power to develop and dispose of land, power to prepare development schemes, and power to extinguish public rights of way. These are similar to the powers DSD has at the minute. Some housing functions relating to housing and fitness and houses in multiple occupation will also be included in the bill. This will require councils in relation to HMOs to operate the statutory registration scheme. In relation to housing unfitness, councils currently have responsibility for determining and enforcing fitness standards for the private sector. Under the provisions of this draft bill, responsibility for this will be extended to cover all tenures, private and public. The bill will also transfer responsibility for leg-and-side matters to the Council for the District of Belfast. This will include powers to enable the new council to safeguard the legacy of the work done by the Leg-and-Side Corporation up to date. The Local Government Act provides for the drawing up of transfer schemes for assets and liabilities associated with the work going to council, and it's intended that the budget for the work will be transferred via the rating system. So the Regeneration and Housing Bill does not cover either of these elements. That's covered by the Local Government Act. DSD's Regeneration and Housing Bill would empower and enable councils to make decisions for their own areas, to address social need and promote well-being through the powers which have been conferred on them. Councils will, however, have a statutory duty placed on them to have due regard to guidance issued by the Department, for example, the Urban Regeneration and Community Development Framework. The Department is working closely with the new council clusters to ensure a smooth transition by April 2015. DSD officials have recently completed a series of workshops with council clusters and detailed implementation plans have been drawn up. Councils have also been given indicative allocations of regeneration funding to allow them to plan ahead. The Minister intends to introduce the Regeneration Housing Bill before the summer recess, subject to executive agreement. Alison here can provide more detail on the Department's programme for managing this major change, including arrangements for regular contact with council clusters. And Stephen can explain in more detail, if required, the housing proposal in the bill. We hope to be able to address any initial concerns you may have at this stage in relation to the draft bill or the Department's proposals more generally. Of course, the committee will have further opportunities to scrutinise the bill in more detail. Colleagues and I are happy to take any questions at this stage.
Right, Henry, thank you for that. Could I ask just a couple of questions before bringing members in? In terms of the transferring some of the powers, I mean, there's two questions really. I mean, are you satisfied the department will continue to work with councils post-transfer of functions, just at least in some cases overarching policy purposes, and indeed even, you know, in terms of capacity and making sure that there's proper advice from the department and that advice has been adopted? And then second, in terms of the housing related matters, I mean, are there provisions formally where the housing associations will be tied into those structures as well? Because if we don't, obviously the functions around housing, you know, relate to regulation and monitoring and fitness and so on. So what way is the housing association tied in that as well? Those are there and also kept.
Well, on the first point, there will be an ongoing role for the department. The department will be responsible for strategic oversight of this, will be responsible for the policy, and is working closely with council clusters at the minute, and that work will continue post 2015 to ensure that the whole thing transfers over smoothly. Alison, do you want to say anything?
I would just add to that we are going to work very closely with the councils in the context of their community planning requirements from 2015 onwards, and it is our intention that we will provide advice and guidance and support them with evidence base as well to help inform their decisions on where they might invest their funding.
Okay, and you suggested Stevens maybe going to deal with some of the housing.
Yes, I can.
Want to do that now then?
Certainly, Chair, yeah. I mentioned, talk about the housing issues.
Just given the centrality of it. And
Absolutely. In terms of the powers that councils will get around unfitness, currently they have powers, councils already have powers to inspect private rented sector dwellings and declare them unfit and take a range of actions. What we're doing in the bill is essentially transferring other powers that the housing executive currently have. So local authorities or councils will then have responsibility for dealing with unfit housing across all sectors, so there will be obviously interaction with housing associations. Similarly, the regulatory functions that they'll get around houses and multiple occupation deals with houses and multiple occupation across the rented sector, including social rented housing where there are a small number of HMOs, so there will be interaction. On broader issues in terms of housing association linkages into councils, the community planning process, which is obviously part of a different piece of legislation, will be central to that. And housing associations will have the opportunity to work with councils and other partners through the community plan to deliver a range of changes and improvements in terms of housing as part of that process.
I think I read that the department would be providing the facility for council when they're developing some regeneration type schemes. There'd be some, as I think I saw the wording, some element of housing. Can you tell me what the parameters are of that? Does that mean building houses, providing houses?
It could be a range of things, and later, perhaps when we have the briefing on building successful communities, we can talk a little bit more in detail about that. But for example, at the minute, housing associations are working in a fairly small way with councils. I mean, I had a meeting yesterday with one housing association who's keen to take forward a major regeneration project in the Lisburn council area, and they're working with the council to see if a broader partnership can be developed where the housing association develops the housing, but there's other lands that could be amenity lands that could be used for recreation purposes that the council may wish to be involved with. So for us, there are opportunities here in terms of linking housing and regeneration more effectively than perhaps has been the case in the past.
But you can see the spectre of the sensitivity around this issue where councils are able to build houses. On what basis would these houses be built?
No, councils would not have opportunities or powers to build. I mean, in terms of social housing,
yeah,
the powers around social housing are not transferring. Those are remaining with the housing executive in terms of payment of grant, and housing associations will be the delivery vehicle. But it's more about developing partnerships where, if a housing scheme is being taken forward, that if there are opportunities for regeneration or recreation, that there's a partnership with the council. And there have been some examples, fairly modest examples, where, for example, as part of a social housing scheme, a housing association has built a play park, and the council has come behind that and agreed to maintain that play park. So there are some examples, but the powers transferring to councils will enable more of that partnership working to develop.
I'm not actually sure where that fully answers the question. We'll come back to it again later on. So we'll take members. Sammy.
Okay. I noticed that you had workshops with councils. You haven't included in the briefing any of the feedback from that. I take it that we will get feedback, or we will get a copy of whatever feedback there have been from the councils on this, will we?
We've had an extensive range of engagement with them from a very early stage in the process. We've engaged with senior officers from councils just to explain the DSD position, and we're now embarking on a round of engagements with the new Chief Executive's designate. There are change managers from DSD working closely with the change managers in each council cluster on the range of implementation plans that they might want to put in place. I certainly could provide a report on the effectiveness of that engagement so far, if the committee would welcome that.
It would also give us some guidance, I think, as to how councils view some of this. I mean, I tell you, and I've only had a cursory look through the bill and through the briefing you've given us. I'm a bit confused, because on one hand we're told that this is being devolved to the councils. On the other hand, if you read through the bill, there's the input for the department. You almost get the impression the department doesn't want to let this go at all. First of all, the councils will be subject and will have to adhere to any guidance issued by the department. So we say that the council has the power to make these decisions, yet it's within the parameters. That the councils can draw up development plans, but the department can also issue development plans where it deems that it's necessary for a particular area. We have already been told in your responses that there will be ongoing oversight of this function by the department. And it just strikes me that, is this not, we're talking over government in Northern Ireland, is this not a case of the department holding on to the function, or at least holding on to staff and work, which really is quite rightly should be done by the councils? And why do we have to have this overlap of councils can issue development plans, department can issue development plans, councils can have the decisions, but the department issues the guidance, councils have responsibility, but the department has oversight? It just strikes me that this isn't really being devolved at all. And maybe you could give us some idea as to what kind of staffing do you imagine is going to be required for all of this involvement by the department?
Well, maybe I could start off on that one. The intention is not for the department to hold on to this. The intention is that this will be a light touch, in effect. We're devolving responsibility out to councils. We're saying the powers that we currently have, you can have those powers. You can go and do development schemes, you can go and do regeneration, you can do public realm schemes, you can do community development, whatever. You can give grants, you can give loans, you can. The range of powers we have at the minute are all going to councils. We're not withholding any powers. We're saying it's over to you effectively. But the minister is still over all responsibility for the policy. So obviously there's going to be some oversight and some exchange of information. The guidance is guidance. Councils will have to have regard to it. But in effect, they can use their own discretion to work in whatever area they want to work in, to use whatever powers they want to use, if they want to use them at all. It's really up to the councils to do. So if that's the impression that come across, that's not what is intended. But with every devolution of responsibilities here, there has to be some sort of a mechanism to influence that. And I think that's more of influence rather than control.
Well, I mean, let's just take the development schemes. Councils were it considered expedient that any area in its district should develop, redevelop or improved as a whole, the council may prefer a development scheme. And then we go to page 29 of our briefing, that the department, where it considers it expedient for any area should be developed, redevelopment or developed as a whole, may prepare a development scheme. Now, you know,
Yeah, but that is only where it is considered to be of significance to the whole or substantial part of Northern Ireland. That's going to be very rare. I mean, we're talking about, first of all, development schemes here, which are rare. We don't have many development schemes. We're talking about comprehensive development schemes. Victoria Square was one. And for a development scheme then to be considered to be of regional significance is going to be even rarer. So, you know, we're not talking about the vast majority of work that council are going to be doing won't be required to be interfered with by the department. We're talking about in exceptional circumstances now. If you look at the planning legislation, they have a provision in there to look at regionally significant, that the department will decide whether something is regionally significant. They're talking about things like airports and stuff like that. So it's the exception rather than the rule, and that's what we're talking about in here. It's going to be rare, effectively.
what infrastructure do you imagine the department keeping in place for this drawing up of guidance, issuing of guidance, supplying of, because another thing you said, we should supply the data. I imagine councils would be quite able to do themselves, monitoring that what happens, stepping in with development plans where it is deemed that a development plan is necessary. What kind of infrastructure is going to be retained within the department to do all of this?
Well, we recognise there's two elements to the work. There's going to be the residual function once everything transfers. There's still going to be some work that the department's going to be required to do in relation to sorting out accruals, outstanding PPEs, closing down project files, and that sort of work. We estimate that'll probably take in the region of 6 months to complete, just to close the existing programmes down. There's a retained function responsibility that we're currently examining in the department to see what level of support that the councils will require from us, certainly in relation to community planning, because we do want to work closely with the councils and influence the direction of their community plans. Then there is the guidance and the evidence piece in relation to providing them the types of statistics that we would provide to neighbourhood renewal partnerships, for example, that we would provide those at council level so that they would have an evidence base on which to make decisions going forward. We haven't actually bottomed out what the size, the quantum of that function is going to be yet, but it is something that we're actively looking at.
I think it would be important for us, because being one of the concerns there is in the Assembly as a whole is the size of government and what we can do to reduce it and place it would be useful to have. The more you talk, the more it strikes me that we're not actually going to reduce the regeneration function of the department all that much. Just one last question on this one. And I noted in clause 3 that powers to carry out work and improvement of the environment those powers can only be exercised in where they're in areas of social need within a district. Now, does that make it? I can think of areas in Larne, for example, in Carrickfergus, where there would be, which we regarded as areas of social need, but actually to exercise powers to improve those areas may well require work to be carried out in adjacent areas, because that's maybe where the opportunities lie. But they wouldn't be regarded as social need. Is that unnecessarily restrictive insofar as it doesn't allow the kind of net to be thrown wider, where maybe a project or purchasing of land or whatever or investment might benefit an area of social need but wouldn't actually be in the area of social need?
Well, that's a very wide range in power which we use very wide range of areas at the moment. If the improvement can benefit an area of social need, the improvement doesn't actually have to be in the area of social need. It can be outside of it. If it can be demonstrated that its impact goes wider than its location, that's fine, and that helps at the moment. So you could build something in an area which would have wide-ranging benefits across a number of areas of social need. So that's definitely not meant to be restrictive.
Okay, Jim.
And it will be for councils to determine whether it is a benefits in area of social need. We won't be interfering with that.
But it's subject to the regeneration and community development framework as well.
Yes.
Because you appreciate where we're all coming from, maybe even from different angles. A lot of these things are subject to something else.
Yes.
There's a read across. So I think some of us are going to be a bit maybe limited to how we fully respond as at this moment in time. That's just maybe a wee early caveat into that.
Yeah.
Jim?
Yeah, I just want to go back to the point that Sammy was pursuing with you about how real this devolution is. A possible test of that is for you to tell us how many staff, what staff reduction there'll be in the department when this process is completed.
That's an iterative process at the moment. We're working with each council to determine what their staffing requirements are going to be. They're not in a position, shadow councils have only just been established, so they're not in a position to give us definite figures at this stage as to how many staff of the 188 or so staff available that they're actually going to want to work with them over a period of...
Now, are you anticipating transferring DSD staff to councils?
There is a scheme that has been drafted that will be communicated to the councils shortly, but it is on a secondment type arrangement over a period of 2 to 3 years is what we envisage that the councils will want, and that's the feedback that we've been getting with them.
So you tell us that the councils are getting these powers to deal with social need, etc., but they will apply those by using seconded staff from the department.
They're getting the powers and all of the budgets associated with the delivery of regeneration and the staff salaries associated with the delivery of regeneration.
Why would they not have those powers exercised by their own staff in their own right?
That's completely up to the councils. That's where we're working with them in partnership at the minute to establish whether they have in-house skills available to them already or whether they want to work with DSD staff for a period of time to build skills within their councils to have the capacity going forward.
But just on the point of whether it's a real devolving of powers or not, when the process is complete, how many less staff will there be in DSD as a consequence of that?
Well, it's hard for me to pinpoint a figure at this stage. Absolutely.
How many do you think?
I don't have a figure at the moment in terms of how many staff the councils are going to want, but in terms of that there's around 188 staff involved in delivery at the moment. Obviously, when the powers transfer or devolved to the councils in 2015, there's no longer a role for those staff within DSD, and my HR colleagues are actively working on a strategy of manpower planning to manage that. So if the councils, for example, don't want any of those staff, then they will have to be redeployed.
Well, many staff, to put it another way, how many of the existing staff would you need to retain to exercise your supervisory functions?
We haven't, I mean, that's a conversation that we have to have with DOE shortly around what our reporting requirements are going to be. As Henry said, that's going to be very light touch. I don't see there being a huge bureaucracy around monthly reporting or anything like that with the councils. We're hoping actually to dovetail with the DOE reporting requirements. So if a council is required to bring forward an annual report, for example, we might be able to satisfy ourselves within that they are having regard to the regeneration framework.
What of other separate matters? I haven't had time to study the bill in detail, but where within it is social need defined?
Section 1, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a definition of social need.
It's probably not defined.
Or does not need to be?
Well, it gives examples of financial assistance to address social need in terms
Yes,
of...
but surely you would need to define what social need is. Now, the answer might quite simply be that it's as defined in the Social Need Northern Ireland Order of 1986, but does the bill not need to say that?
Well, what we're saying is that the powers that are currently in the social need order are being given over to councils, the exact same powers that we have. So they'll be able to operate, and they'll be able to determine themselves. Those are very wide
But
ranges.
this is a freestanding piece of legislation. So when one comes to read it, and you start reading about benefits one or more areas of social need, would you not expect to read within the bill a definition of an area of social need?
I think we'll have to come back to you on that one.
In clause 11, there is this power of the council to extinguish a public right of way. How does that sit with the statutory duty in Article 3 of the Access to the Countryside Order to preserve public rights of way? There's already a statutory function of councils.
It's in circumstances where council has developed, drawn up and consulted on a development scheme.
Yes.
And in those circumstances, they would have taken account of the requirement to protect public rights of way.
But just let me remind you what Article 3 of the Access to the Countryside Order says. A district council shall assert, protect and keep open and free from obstruction or encroachment any public right of way, etc. Now, that is already a statutory function of a council. Here in Article 11, we have the council now being given the power to extinguish any public right of way within the confines you're talking about. But how does that sit with the power in the Access to the Countryside, or the requirement in the Access to the Countryside Order to preserve public
We'd have
rights
to
of
take
way?
some advice on that, but I would imagine that with any piece of legislation, there are areas where you can have exceptions. So I presume a council in the circumstances would deem that it was necessary for this development scheme and it was necessary to go against the other piece of legislation.
Doesn't say that, does it? Doesn't say subject to, it doesn't say notwithstanding.
Well, that's something we may well have to address as we go through the bill. I'll take some advice on that.
Okay, thank you.
Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. Return and thank you for the introduction which you've given to us for this. Can I return to the area of the transfer of staff? And you've said that you've been in consultation, and I appreciate how early days this is, but at the same time you're trying to progress a bill with us in respect of these matters. What training would be provided to council staff? Because bearing in mind that councils are coming together and potentially will have surplus staff, what training will be provided, or what resource will be given to councils in order to train their own staff to fulfil these roles rather than to accept any of the 188 civil servants?
The DOE have within their budget a pot of money for capacity building within councils. And as part of that, we have been identifying, and the councils have been identifying in particular training that they might require, so they can avail of that funding should they deem it necessary over the next 9 months.
So it's a reality that very few staff will transfer out of your department to local government?
Until we get into detailed negotiations with the new shadow councils and they're established, it would be difficult to say at this stage.
But you do recognise that that's going to be a key part of the whole planning of this process?
Yes.
Can I ask you also in respect of how you've said that the funding that is currently allocated by the department will go to the councils. If the councils determine they require more funding, how will that be raised or how will that be negotiated? And will ultimately ratepayers have to pay the difference?
We have brought forward a financial allocation model that provides a fair and forward-looking allocation to each council from 2015 onwards. It is the totality of the urban regeneration and community development budget that we're providing to them.
But you can recognise that civil servants and departments will fight very strongly with DFP to improve or enhance their budget for a particular aspect area. You won't need to have that fight any longer because you'll have transferred that function to councils, and we run the risk of seeing the councils having to take on more of the financial burden. You can transfer the sum as it is today, so what guarantee is it that you will be fighting to get that increased as years progress?
We'll won't be fighting on the council's behalf
Exactly.
to have it increased, but I would say that councils have much more flexible financing arrangements than councils do, or than the department does.
That's called ratepayers' money.
Well, they can capitalise, they can borrow, they can create reserves, they can attract private sector investment. They do have quite a range of financial initiatives that they can draw on. I mean, we will be working in partnership with the councils going forward in terms of community planning, and they won't be knocking on a closed door if they're coming back and petitioning and saying, well, we don't have enough for a regionally significant scheme. I don't.
But you're putting the pressure for the call on this money now at arm's length. You're actually handing the pressure to increase the budget as years progress to district councils rather than to yourself.
Well, it was an executive decision to transfer this range of functions and powers to the councils, and the transfer has to be rates neutral and fit for purpose at the point of transfer, and we will ensure that that is the case.
And will it remain rates neutral in the future?
And that'll be a matter for each individual council.
Yeah.
And ultimately for the poor ratepayer. Thank you.
Cheers, thank you. Fra, then Michael.
Sure. And I know that this is a pre-legislative briefing, and that we will have the opportunity during the scrutiny of the bill that there is anything rightly so. And I would have a number of concerns that will leave that stage at a time. I do have concerns about the issue that Alec raised, and I would like to find out, if possible, if you could come back to us on the partnership arrangements that would exist between councils and housing associations and building units of accommodation. The other issue that will we have the ability to be able to have an impact on issues around houses of multiple occupation, and that said that something will be coming separately from that, although it does mention it in the bill. The whole question of the Private Tenancies Order 206, that whilst at each stage of that we have been told that it's adding to councils' ability to be able to deal with unfitness and other aspects of housing, but in reality that is not the case, and most councils would say, whilst they can issue orders, it's not worth the paper that it's wrote on, because people who provide that type of unfit housing do not really have to abide for it, or they get a very small fine or a slap in the wrist. So I think we will be able to impact on that in terms of adding to the likes of the 2006 Act that will give those councils the ability to deal with that. I say there are quite a number of things. The whole question of need, as Jim raised, that the council has a definition, the department has a definition of need that may be different from the council's definition, and which will we be running with? There are 11 different councils. Are there 11 different definitions of need in each of the councils? What would be the distribution of staff? 188 staff. Sometimes you, because you're from Belfast or you were a councillor, you were from a different council area, you try to work out what that will mean for that council in terms of being able to provide an effective service when the thing. And there are some of the questions I hope that we're able to get into during the passage of the scrutiny of them.
Can I just pick up on that there, just before you answer that there, Steve, if you don't mind, or whoever, or then I bring Michael into the follow-up on that. I mean, as far back as when Margaret Ritchie was the minister, I was advised by her that while the Housing Executive had responsibility to register all HMOs, that would not be completed until 2013. That was like a period of 5 years or so. I don't know, I'm not aware that all those HMOs have actually been registered since. But more importantly, and Tommy's aware of this because he and I discussed this when he was the Minister for Environment, that a lot of developers had then stopped asking for HMOs and dressed it up under something else. So for me, I know it will come as a separate item in terms of the HMOs, another subject plan or whatever. I'd just be concerned about transfer of function without having front-loaded that. In other words, you're handing a legacy problem to some councils that will have to put a lot of time and effort into getting houses of multiple occupation or similar type of development, not called HMOs, get them registered so that they actually can be monitored, so is it more importantly that you don't allow other residential areas to reach a tipping point where there's so many rented accommodation that you just destroy the residential character of an area. So you might be able to give us some insight on that, if not today. I certainly would like a feedback on that, because that for me runs core to how the council can be expected to pick this up in the transition period.
Sorry, it's just a matter of that was, I did raise it, well, as I mentioned, HMOs in here. What it also says is that that will be dealt with separately, and so, and where does that leave it? How do we impact on it?
I can just come back on that. The Housing Executive advises there are nearly 6,000 HMOs in Northern Ireland that are part of the 6,000 that are part of their registration scheme, and they've currently registered.
There's 600,000 registered, is there?
Nearly 6,000
registered.
No, there are nearly six. Their figures indicate there are nearly 6,000 HMOs in Northern Ireland. They've registered 4,384, and their plan is to complete registration before the handover of the powers. And the committee may have some issues with that, but we can come back in more detail. But those are the figures that the Housing Executive has.
I actually thought, come back when I was told that years ago that taking to 2013 would be ridiculous. We're still told it's still not done, so it's even more ridiculous.
In terms of the effectiveness of the current powers and so on, if we take the two different components that both you, Chair, and Mr. McCann have mentioned, to take HMOs first. We did do a piece of work last year where we consulted on improvements to the regulation of HMOs. That work we have developed into instructions for a bill. We're currently in discussions internally within the department around the number of bills that there's the capacity to bring forward in terms of this mandate. But if there is the capacity, then there is the scope to do a bill. We're at a fairly advanced stage in terms of having the preparations for instructions to go to our lawyers to draft a bill. Councils have told us that they would like to take on the registration scheme that is currently in place and bed that in before we bring forward new legislation. So that would also be a factor that we would need to consider. But we've been working through all of the findings from our work last year, and that's at a relatively advanced stage. The Minister's also on record on the other side of things in terms of the private tenancies order and regulation of the private rented sector, that he would like to do a review of the regulation of the private rented sector with a view to looking at if further strengthening of the regulatory powers are required. And we're in the early stages of planning what the scope of that review might be, and we would hope to initiate that before the end of this calendar year.
Can I just ask one question just on that? Given that the councils will now have powers over all tenancies, including public sector housing, and in some cases, some of the poor housing is actually in the public sector, will those regulatory powers extend to the public sector housing as well, not just private sector? Yes, absolutely. And through the bill, the councils will have powers to do things like put on a closing order or a repair notice, a demolition order, a deferred action notice that then puts a statutory requirement on the landlord to act within a certain period of time, and if he or she doesn't act, then there are powers of redress and so on. So there are quite extensive powers that are being linked to the existing powers that councils already have, and it's across all tenures. If I could just touch briefly on the other point Mr. McCann raised around housing associations. Councils, I think we need to be clear, the current functions the Housing Executive has to assess housing need, to pay housing association grant, to develop new social housing are staying where they are. They're staying with the Housing Executive. None of those powers are transferring. However, there is a clear link between some of the regeneration powers that are transferring, and there's some potential there. For example, in the past, Henry has led out comprehensive development schemes in Belfast, a regeneration scheme which has involved an element of social housing, and there's been discussion between councils and the Housing Executive then about bringing
a housing association partnering to build social housing as part of a mixed scheme. So there is potential, we do it now, and there's potential going forward to have mixed schemes which involve housing, but the powers for determining the need for that housing and the powers to fund that housing is resting with the housing executive. That's not changing.
Sir Chair, could we have examples of those?
I don't know.
Don't talk about that. I don't expect you to.
Yes, Lawnbrook would have been one where it was a regeneration scheme, but it was social housing involved in that.
Could you could you send me just the details of the scheme, what it entailed?
Yeah, we could do.
Yeah.
One of the other things about this is that we would expect, and would probably be included in our guidance, we would expect that any council who is bringing forward a scheme which included social or affordable housing would have, before it comes to the approval stage, they would have demonstrated that they had worked closely with the Housing Executive and Housing Association in putting forward those proposals.
You won't be, Henry, oblivious to some of the controversies around need, and a number of members have already raised that here this morning. I've never got a satisfactory answer as to what portion of budget, for example, would be allocated in an area, who makes the final decision to put money into regeneration, which is fine, which is a very, very important aspect of the work. But sometimes there's a lot of money put into a very small return in terms of providing homes for people. So if you have an allocation system, if you have a housing need in an area, who decides what proportion of the budget available to the executive is going to go into housing developments, might return 10 homes as opposed to spending the money which will provide 100 homes? I never see an explanation or rationale for the proportionality of that. So for me, it's not addressing the objective need. That's my contention, and that's been raising its head again recently. So somebody somewhere along the line needs to provide us with some rationale as to how that actually works and how that's addressed. Because I certainly wouldn't be supporting legislation which doesn't deal with that.
I think the last time I was at committee chair, the committee indicated it might want to get a briefing on that matter from the Housing Executive, and that might be helpful in terms of answering your question.
Okay, thank you. Just put that on the record. Okay, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions, one for Alison, one for Stephen. There is a notion this is all about saving money, but I suppose in some respects it depends who's going to save what. And our attempts at saving money do not always appear to be successful. Would it be possible to get, you made reference earlier on to the 188 staff currently working away delivering these functions. Would it be possible to get some notion as to the total employment costs currently of that 181 staff in terms of salaries, establishment charges, national insurance? In other words, what they cost and the actual value of the schemes that they oversee?
They're within the financial allocation model. The indicative budgets to the councils is in the region of 70 million. Within that, there are approximately 6.7 million associated with staff costs and overheads.
Staff costs and overheads?
Yes.
7 million, 10%?
6.7 million.
Okay, right, thank you. The second question seems more of a moot point. You made reference to unfit properties and the powers that currently exist within the socially rented and the privately rented sectors. Are there any current powers regarding owner-occupied properties that are unfit? And if so, will they be changed within these altered proposals?
Essentially what councils will have is that the powers that the Housing Executive currently have in terms of unfitness deals with the social rented and owner-occupied sector. So essentially, if councils will have the whole gamut, and they already have some public health legislation which they can use in the owner-occupied sector. So it's about bringing all of the powers together. So environmental health departments of councils will have powers to identify properties as unfit and take enforcement action if enforcement action is needed.
What would happen in a scenario where the owner of the property couldn't be identified or traced?
I'm not aware of the operational detail of how the current system works, so I'd have to come back to the committee on that.
What the current system is and what the proposed system is, because most of the difficulties we have would be with abandoned properties. rendering the ones on either side unfit eventually.
Well, there is actually powers, sorry, what I should have said, the powers the housing executive already have, if they put on, which are transferring to councils, if they place a repair notice on a property and an owner can't be found, and that property is potentially, injurious to another party, to a neighbour or whatever, the housing executive has powers, and the councils will have powers under the legislation to do the repairs and then charge the repairs with interest and etc. to the property owner once the property owner is found. So there are things that can be done. It's not used very often. It's very infrequently used. But if something is so dangerous, then there are things that can be done.
Okay. Members content then? We've raised a number of some. Are you looking back at?
Yeah, John, could I just ask one question? It's really about the disposal of land by councils for planning purposes. And I can understand that the point is being the council bests land, acquires it, and then disposes of it to such persons as may appear to be expedient or securing the best use of the land, etc. But where is the requirement, or what safeguards do you build in to make sure that there's the best return and proper value obtained for that land? Because, I mean, as it stands at the moment, it's woolly enough for all kinds of allegations to be made as to why councils acquired land and then didn't get best value for it. So where's the safeguards for proper accountability there?
Well, under the current system which DSD operates, the power to acquire, develop, dispose of land is there. The department would, as part of a development scheme, perhaps ask developers to put forward proposals to develop that, and would be part of that the context that the developer would be offering a premium for it, and that premium would be quality assured by Land and Property Services. So same situation would apply. I'm sure when it goes to councils that they would have to ensure that they get proper value, the proper economic appraisal, proper business cases put out, and a proper justification for the disposal to a particular person or a particular body.
But again, I mean, just reading through it, that isn't, like Jim's earlier point, that may well be the intention, but that's not stated in the legislation.
Yes, but councils will be controlled by other mechanisms other than this regeneration of housing bill. They will have to have proper governance, proper arrangements in place to ensure that they secure best value for money, the same as every other public body. So they would presumably operate under those. If a council was disposing of land as if the department was disposing of land, they would have to ensure that there's a proper business case and they're getting the correct value for the property before they transfer it over.
And there isn't a danger that a council would say, yes, we haven't got the best value for it, but we measure it up against the best use of that or other land in any buildings. I mean, is there? That's where it becomes woolly. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, well,
there's not best value.
It's something that we certainly could include in our guidance. That they have to have due regard to best value, and there is around that. But I don't think it's something that should be included in this bill.
Okay, well, you're looking back.
Sure, and it's just the orient that, and notice that the vesting of lands is also being transferred. My understanding that the housing executive have not vested any land in a considerable period of time, and it didn't even say in the explanatory notes. It explained under what circumstances land will be invested. And I know that in many communities, in many towns and villages, there are pieces of land being held on to by developers in the hope that there will be a turnaround in the economy at some stage, but it's causing serious difficulties, I think, and can be brought back into use if vested for housing or other things. Will that be explained in legislation, that the councils on what circumstances they can use their powers of vesting?
Well, the vesting powers are, again, wide-ranging. If a council determines that it's in accordance with a development plan which has been gone through a process and been approved. That gives them then the authority to go invest. If the council determines that it's for the proper planning of the area, and bearing in mind councils will have responsibility for planning, well, which ties these two things together. If the council determines that the acquisition of a particular site or piece of land is in the best interest or for the best planning of the area, then they can issue a vesting order, as the department does at the moment.
Okay, I mean, there are no other members here indicating speaking again. The caveat was earlier on there, we realise that there's no cross-cutting policies and other potential legislation coming down the line for us, so bearing all that in mind, I think you're taking this to the executive today and you wanted to have some responses. I think you've heard the members of the committee and there's a range of issues been raised, staffing consequences of all of this for both the councils and the department, and obviously all the relevant capacity issues around that, issues around regeneration vis-a-vis meeting the housing need in any given area, the parameters for the housing element as is described in any development scheme, and the definition of social need or need, whatever that might actually be. So, and obviously there's kind of big ticket issues here which members here are flagging up and we'll want to see reflected in any future discussion. Fair enough. Okay, thanks very much for your presentation and your taking those questions of members. Thank you. Members, happy enough to move on then to the next item straight away. Item number 6 is the Housing Amendment Bill. This is a consultation with sponsors, again, another departmental briefing. We're running a little late, but just to try and make the members' attention. This morning we have Daisy Ward, Heloise Brown and Stephen Baird to present on behalf of the department. And this is in relation to the housing, known as the Housing Anti-Social Behaviour Bill. You'll have this on page 11, members, your table items pack. So, members, happy enough then that we just straight away, Deirdre, yourself and your colleagues then, to take the members through your briefing.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the invitation to attend today. We welcome the opportunity to discuss the proposed Housing Amendment Bill with the committee. I briefed the committee earlier this year on the departmental consultation on proposals for legislation to help social landlords deal more effectively with antisocial behaviour. We had responses to the consultation, and we also discussed the proposals at meetings with Housing Rights Service, Housing Community Network and the Northern Ireland Federation of Housing Association. The consultation paper outlined a proposal to enable social landlords to convert secure tenancies to short tenancies for a fixed period where a court has found that the tenant or a member of their household has been guilty of antisocial behaviour. Housing providers who responded to the consultation generally took the view that there were adequate arrangements already in place for providing support services, although the Housing Executive welcomed the opportunity to formalise existing arrangements, and some housing associations agreed that short tenancies would be useful in certain circumstances. Voluntary sector organisations, while welcoming the emphasis on supporting vulnerable tenants, suggested that short tenancies could have adverse equality impacts, particularly on young men. The Human Rights Commission emphasised the right of tenants to contest any evidence against them and the need to avoid penalising tenants or members of their households who have not been guilty of antisocial behaviour. Other consultees, including district councils, were broadly supportive of the short tenancy proposal. Short tenancies are not intended to provide a solution in every case, but could be useful in particular circumstances. I would also emphasise that short tenancies are not solely a punitive measure. Their purpose is not to deprive tenants of their homes, but to ensure that families who would otherwise be evicted for antisocial behaviour can be helped to become better neighbours. This should avoid the risk of simply moving the problem behaviour elsewhere, for example, into the private rented sector. Used properly, short tenancies can prevent evictions from social housing while also successfully tackling antisocial behaviour. We propose that short tenants should have the rights to be given reasons for any decision to seek possession of their tenancy and the right to an internal review of such decisions. This would help to ensure that the proposals meet human rights standards without necessarily involving any significant expense or delay. We propose to further strengthen safeguards for tenants by providing that a secure tenancy can only be converted to a short tenancy where the relevant conviction or injunction relates to a breach of the terms of the tenancy agreement. And we also propose giving landlords discretion to extend the 6-month initial term of a short tenancy by a further 6 months where the provision of support over this extended period is likely to be effective. While the consultation paper proposed that social landlords should be enabled to convert a secure tenancy to a short tenancy where the tenant or a member of their household has been convicted of an offence or made the subject of a court order within the last 3 years, a number of consultees felt that this period was too long. It's difficult to envisage circumstances where a landlord would wait 3 years following a conviction or a court order before converting a tenancy. We therefore propose that landlords should be able to convert tenancies within 6 months of a conviction or where a relevant court order is still in force. Some housing providers who responded to the consultation expressed concern about their ability to manage any serious antisocial behaviour by a tenant or a member of their household while a short tenancy is in place. On the basis that short tenancies need to be backed by effective powers to stop any serious antisocial behaviour without delay, we propose that the court should be enabled to attach powers of arrest without warrant to injunctions against antisocial behaviour, as well as powers to exclude individuals from any premises. Directly targeting the individuals who are responsible for antisocial behaviour would help to address concerns expressed by consultees that short tenancies could penalise tenants or members of their households who have not been involved in such behaviours. These proposals were the subject of a public consultation in November 2009, but were not included in the Housing Amendment Act in 2011 because of the short timescale available for progressing that legislation through the Assembly and the limited drafting resources available at the time. However, it's our view that these proposals would enhance the short tenancy provisions and should therefore be progressed. A common theme which emerged from the consultation was the importance of information sharing in tackling antisocial behaviour, and this issue was the subject of a public consultation in November 2009. The Housing Amendment Act NI 2011 subsequently made provision for the disclosure of information relating to certain orders of the court, where this is required for a limited range of purposes relating to tenancy, exchanges, the right to buy and eligibility for housing. Given that consultees clearly see the need for additional information sharing provision, we now propose that the purposes for which relevant information may be disclosed under existing legislation should be extended to allow any person to disclose any information that may be required by a social landlord for any purpose connected with antisocial behaviour. That summarises our legislative proposals for short tenancy. We propose that a small number of other measures be included in the Housing Amendment Bill, and the first of these relates to the need to clarify existing homelessness legislation. This measure was included in our consultation document on short tenancies and received a number of responses on this. While some consultees were opposed in principle to treating homeless persons as ineligible for assistance, others were broadly in favour, provided that vulnerable persons were not permanently excluded from any form of assistance. We therefore propose to move ahead with this proposal to clarify the existing legislation. The second additional measure to be included in the bill is information sharing on empty homes. An urgent need has been identified for information collected by the Department of Finance and Personnel's Land and Property Services for the purposes of rates collection to be shared with the Department and the Housing Executive to enable owners of empty homes to be contacted with a view to bringing these properties back into use. While the issue of empty homes is not strictly related to antisocial behaviour, it's proposed that the information sharing provisions should include information sharing for the purposes of identifying owners of empty homes. The empty homes issue was included in the Department's housing strategy, which is subject to public consultation, and in the Department's empty homes strategy and action plan. I hope this gives members a clear overview of the proposed Housing Amendment Bill, particularly our proposals to address antisocial behaviour. We have listened to consultees and we recognise the importance of treating all tenants fairly, particularly where action can result in eviction from a social home. We have listened to the concerns of landlords who, on a daily basis, have to manage this balancing act with their tenants to ensure that people's right to quiet enjoyment of their homes is protected. The proposals we've put forward are based on evidence from elsewhere that the short tenancy approach can be effective. Antisocial behaviour is an issue that cannot successfully be addressed on a one-size-fits-all basis, but short tenancies would provide social landlords with an option that can make a difference in the right circumstances. The focus of these proposals is on engaging with people to change their problem behaviour rather than simply moving them on elsewhere. We welcome the committee's views and, of course, any proposals you would wish to make on how we move forward.
Before bringing in a couple of a number of members, Travis, you'll be first.
Yeah.
Just a couple of points there. First of all, you refer to the private landlord registration scheme. So could you just satisfy us that will dovetail with this particular piece of legislation? Then you previously advised the committee that, I mean, obviously I want to thank the department for taking the committee's recommendation that you do extend the consultation period. You did say at that time you would be looking at the notion of the demoted tenancy maybe in more detail. Very few of the consultees have actually dealt with that, so I'm just wondering, is that because they're unaware of it? And then the final point, because you referred there just that some of this ultimately may well result in people being evicted, and that's fine if that's the last resort that has to happen, that people continually abuse the community. But obviously I think all members would also want to make sure that there's enough rights protections in there, and if people do require services, at some point could you elaborate on how you will be able to protect families who do need services? So how do you identify that they do need support services to maintain an appropriate tenancy? So that's just some things. You don't need to necessarily answer those now, but maybe come back to us on them throughout the meeting. Okay. I'll bring in Trevor first of all.
I want to, Chairman, just to declare an interest or draw your attention to my declaration that it's been a private landlord.
Okay, Trevor, thank you for that. Okay, so I don't know if you're able to pick up any of those points first before bringing in other members. A couple of us just for clarification, really. Yeah.
In relation to the landlord registration, yes, this is intended to dovetail along it. As the committee members are aware, the housing strategy for Northern Ireland that was published in 2012 was intended to look at housing as an ecosystem, so all of the pieces that are infected, and you are aware that the Housing Strategy Action Plan has, you know, a fairly substantial number of actions to be taken forward across all sorts of tenures to try and link up and have a more holistic view of making housing better and more accessible moving forward. So yes, it is intended that that this will dovetail.
And the concept of demoted tenancy?
I think in terms of the range of the consultation responses we got, there was a lot of support for the element of the provision that would support change in behaviour, and that really is the protection in terms of ensuring that the problem isn't simply moved elsewhere. It's an opportunity for landlords to try and proactively address the behaviour. So we felt, again, that this was an area that had perhaps more support than demoted tenancies, because it potentially could change behaviour, reducing the need for an eviction.
Okay, and then as I say, the final point I would raise was around the notion of you may well, in your deliberations around a tenancy, work out that a family may need support. Mm-hmm. So it's how that's fundamentally addressed, and how do we ensure that those supports are made available.
Yeah, and we have attempted to build those in, I think, again, around the focus on injunctions on a member of the household rather than treating the household as a whole. Certainly the provision of support services could be to the tenant in particular or the member of the household, depending on what the need is, and those needs may be different. And we want those provisions to be very much about tailoring the support to the particular needs of, say, a parent and a child.
But will that be written into the legislation, for example? Is that going to be written in so it's underpinned?
We can certainly include it in guidance around how this measure is used. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Brad and Summer.
Sure, I'll be brief on that because we had went over quite a number of stuff the last time you were at the thing, and I would like to start by saying, Alex said it, that nobody wants to see evictions anywhere, but there are circumstances in some of us living communities that are being terrorised by people, and it's trying to find that balance between people's human rights and the rights of tenants that live in communities also. And I've always said that the housing providers have to take care and towards applicants for housing, but the same sort of care is not shown towards the people that some of these people may live beside. One of the difficulties recently that I would sit on a housing providers group that helps set up, and it's bringing together tenants and people who provide housing within a sizable area. And I think one of the difficulties you have in terms of the information sharing protocols that exist is that it only stretches to the housing executive and does not stretch the housing associations. So housing associations that are trying to determine the background or not of some of the applicants, but especially in terms of transfers, that information is not forthcoming. I know that in the Callan area, that about a year ago, the police pulled out of the information sharing protocols that existed because they believed they were giving out too much information. Then you can see when that happens, a serious increase in antisocial activity across that area. So when you're talking about information sharing protocols, it has to extend to all housing providers. And the fact of life is, whether we like it or not, is that housing associations are the main provider of social accommodation in the north. I still haven't got my head around how short tenancies will actually impact, and I've actually went out and spoke to a number of resident associations, would impact on the ability to deal with anti-social behaviour, anti-social tenants, because at the end of the day, it's not really dealing with the problem. I fully understand that there are parents that have difficulty dealing with their children of whatever age, but it's also the case that the parents that just don't give a damn what happens in communities, and you have to have something in there to allow you to deal with it. I agree with what Alex says also, that you can put in paper. Mickey's saying that's a very rare occasion that I would agree with Alex Maskey and everything, you know. But I think that when you're looking at the type of help that people require, you know, it's no use saying that, well, social services are and deal with it, or we can, or some other organisations. There are organisations within each of the communities. It could be Sure Start, it could be one of the other ones that are funded by government, that already have a handle on most of the stuff that's going on. They certainly have quite a lot of sympathy in dealing with many difficult families, and you need to be, when people are being pointed in the direction, those are the organisations that you need to be pointing in the direction, because they could end up being the most effective organisations to deal with it. The other point was, if you go on the internet, and you see programmes about different, how they deal with different aspects of antisocial activity in England. And although different councils or different groups have different things, but there are some fairly effective ways that they deal with it, taking in the human rights implications, but also effectively dealing with those who want to destroy their communities.
On the short secure tenancies, you're right, it's not the solution for every occurrence of antisocial behaviour. It's intended to be the short tenancy to emphasise the seriousness of the situation with the tenant, but also to get the support to that group that might help them to change their behaviour, so that you're not moving that problem on elsewhere. And you're right about who might provide that support. It does have to be holistic. There might be some health and social care element to that, but we're also suggesting that some of the floating support services that are delivered through the Supporting People programme, which is funded through the Housing Executive, which does cover things like Sure Start, etc., are probably the best way to deliver some of that support in the communities where there is a good understanding of what the issues are and what the support needed might be. It's not going to be suitable in all cases. You know, when you're going to need a range of measures, because the causes of antisocial behaviour are very wide.
Well, I think you're right on this way. I've done that many multi-agency group meetings in relation to antisocial, especially this past year, and sometimes I sit and scratch my head about what benefit they are, because they go away to their individual organisations and come back again. Social services, who has a responsibility for people up to a certain age, that they would throw their hands up and say, well, people are very vulnerable and they're 100% right, but what does that tell me about what you can do about trying to bring some discipline or order in a community that is under complete threat from imploding within itself?
Okay, Sammy.
Okay. Can I just take you to the information sharing on the empty homes, which I think is a very important issue, and I know from previous job I did just how intransient LPS were in this, but their argument at that stage was that they couldn't possibly do it because of data protection laws.
Yes.
If that is the case, and if it really is a data protection issue, how can the legislation you're proposing overcome that particular difficulty?
I think what LPS were saying was there were data protection issues in how the information is collected and what it was collected for. So it was collected for the purposes of administering rates, but also the Information Commissioner would have said if you collected the information for that purpose, you can't then use it for this. We have been working alongside LPS as we move forward in this, and they have said that they wished to share the information with us, but were unable to do so because of the Information Commissioner status. So us having some legislation that allows them to share that information with us removes that barrier from that, which would pick up on an earlier point that the committee were making in the previous briefing about how do you find out who owns an empty home which may have fallen into dereliction, that may be becoming the locus of bad behaviours.
So is this going to require LPS when they're, for example, getting information from people? I purchase a house, which I'm going to, I may or may not rent out, but I purchase a house, that LPS make it clear to me that the information about that house, if it becomes empty, may well be shared with others so that they can approach me to see if I'm interested in renting it out. Does LPS have to then do something with existing owners of housing to enable the information to be shared?
I can't speak on LPS's behalf, but I will check that and come back to you. But I would assume that that's correct, that they will have to make that information known.
Okay, right. I'm not too sure what the purpose of the main part of this bill is. Is it to protect people who are tenants and who are bad tenants, or is it to actually help to solve a problem which, as Fra has described, makes life absolute misery for people who have to live beside a bad tenant?
I would say the purpose of this bill in terms of short, secure tenancies is to, as Fra alerted, the causes of antisocial behaviour are myriad, but in some instances it may be that you're able to identify what the root cause is and then give those people support to change those behaviours for once and all, so that they become good tenants through a short, secure tenancy, but with the relevant support to change their behaviours.
Well, if that is the case, and I assume that's the answer you're going to give me, the one thing that I find with people who are bad tenants is that, you see, if they think they can get away with something, that'll only encourage them in behaviour. Now, let me just go through the process which is outlined here. Before you can apply to the court for a short tenancy, there has to be a record of antisocial behaviour, either an antisocial behaviour order, which we all know takes about a year to get, if indeed the housing executive or statutory bodies even seek it, because they think it's so worthless now anyway, or there has to be some other court action taken. So there's a long lead-in period before this ever happens. Then you apply to the court for a short tenancy. There cannot be immediate eviction because you've got to show that for 6 months you counsel the people who are engaged in this activity. If over that period they behave themselves, and it may well be that do behave themselves, then at the end of the 6 months, you've got to go back to a secure tenancy. And so the process can start all over again. If they haven't behaved themselves or responded to the counselling, then you can apply to the court to have the repossession of the property. But there's then a further legal process where reasons have to be given for the decision to seek possession, and that can be appealed against. Then, if the tenant believes that Article 6 of the Convention on Human Rights has been impinged on, they can appeal again. And you've already shown in the evidence you've given that there's a plethora of organisations out there who would be quite happy to take those kind of cases up. How long is this process going to take? If I've got a constituent who's got a tenant who is torturing, and I mean torture, and I could give you lots of examples, I'm sure everybody in this room could give an example. How long does this process take before there's any chance of somebody getting respite from a tenant who is determined to make their life hell?
I mean, it is very much, it's at landlord's discretion, I think, to not see this as a process that you take before eviction. It's one option that you might want to consider. It isn't something that will be taken as an additional step in the process. It's very much a case of where landlords can see that this might be effective and where the tenant's prepared to engage with support, and they can see a measurable or defined improvement in behaviour as a result of the support. The landlord can then see that this might be an option for them to do. It certainly isn't an option that you take before the normal, notice of seeking possession.
And that's the whole point, because we have had the housing order, which gives the option of antisocial behaviour, acceptable behaviour contracts, antisocial behaviour orders, probationary tenancies, and my experience has been that the housing executive and housing associations will take all of the easy routes to avoid eviction before they will ever decide to grasp the nettle of difficult tenants. Now, what we're getting here, and you haven't answered the question how long this is likely to take, now we're getting here's another get-out clause for them, another route, a longer route even than some of the stuff which there is under the housing order. How long could a landlord stretch this out, or could this be stretched out?
I mean, the additional provisions that we've put in around the right to review and appeal and Article 6 would still apply with a notice just simply for an eviction notice. So it isn't that we're proposing anything at the end of a short tenancy that would be different to the end of a secure tenancy, but the short tenancy is evidence that the landlord has tried to give the tenant every opportunity to improve, and that the tenant has therefore had to take that initiative to also accept support and change their behaviour.
Yeah, but how long is it? Give me an idea of how long this process is likely to take. From the beginning, identifying a character who is causing difficulties, getting the necessary antisocial behaviour order in place, then going for the short tenancy, then doing the counselling, then having all the appeals, everything else. I mean, we're talking years here, aren't we?
It shouldn't be years or anything like it. It can take at least 6 months to get an order for possession of a secure tenancy. What we're talking about here is it's a 6-month time-limited process where the tenant is going to be on notice that they have this period of time in which to benefit from whatever support they're going to be offered. If they choose not to take up that option, then the court can be asked to terminate the tenancy at the end of the 6-month period. So you're really talking about 6 months.
Well, you're not. Because don't really, they've got the right to appeal, and I assume that all of the court mechanism of getting possession of the house will still apply after the short-term tenancy has been applied for, as it would for secure tenancy.
Well, it's a mandatory possession order, which is as far as the legal system allows us to go in terms of granting orders for possession without spinning out the process unnecessarily. As far as appeal is concerned, I think that's a right that's written into the legal system, and there's not much you can do about that. but the court will be required to grant the order for possession if the court is satisfied that the landlord has done what they are required to do in terms of the process, in terms of offering the correct support. If that all has been done, the court will be required to make the order for possession. The tenant may choose to raise the human rights objection, in which case it's open to them to do that. Again, that's human rights legislation over which we have no control, but we are trying to make the most of what the legal system offers us here. We can do no more than that.
Well, I mean, you're very optimistic. All can say on the time, there's not a 6-month window. Yeah. There's a lead-in period to it. There's a secured tenancy counselling period. There's a right of review for any reasons that might be issued. There's then and of course, given that, and this is how it's worded in paragraph 5, if the counselling or support is not successful and the antisocial behaviour continues, the landlord would be empowered to ask the court to grant an order of possession. Now, you know, how do we define whether it's been successful or not? Is it the degree of antisocial, if it's any antisocial behaviour continues, or it continues at a lower level? Is that acceptable? I mean, there's so many woolly areas here. All I'm saying is, I don't believe, if this is presented, and let's not present this as an answer to the problem that Fra has described. This seems to me to be elongating the whole process. The other thing is this. I mean, I imagine once you introduce this, this is what courts will look for, whether, although you've said it's voluntary and it's something a landlord can choose to do. I imagine that once it's introduced, that will be, the court will be saying, well, have you not tried the route of a short tenancy? How does a private landlord, who maybe only has, maybe it's an old woman or an old man who happens to have a couple of houses which they're pension, and happen to get a difficult tenant in, how do they go through this whole process of putting in place counselling and ensuring that the people attend the counselling and some will be funded under the Supporting People Grant, some will not be funded under the Supporting People Grant? Is this really going to encourage private landlords, except for the big private landlords, to want to put properties onto the market?
Private landlords won't be doing this. This applies to social landlords only.
It'll only apply to social landlords. So a private landlord can't apply for a short tenancy then?
No, there would be no reason for a private landlord to do that. In the social rented sector, you have a secure tenancy, which is, as you know, difficult to terminate by court action. In the private sector, they have a different type of tenancy, which is theoretically much simpler to be terminated by court action. So the purpose of the short tenancy is to address secure tenancy issues, around the secure tenancy, which of course doesn't exist in the private rented sector. So the issue is just not as relevant.
So you don't see any, and the legislation will ensure that there's no chance that a court would say to a private landlord who's got someone on, say, a 1-year tenancy or whatever, we want you to apply for this. This could not possibly, and the legislation will not allow the court to request a private landlord to go down this route.
Absolutely not, because the legislation will refer to conversion of secure tenancies to short tenancies. It won't refer to conversion of private tenancies to secure tenancy. It'll be written into the legislation. It'll be specific.
Okay, that's good.
All right, thank you. Mickey, Trevor, and then Michael.
Thanks for the presentation. But you've just raised the point there, because there's a huge sector out there, the private sector, the private rented sector, which is totally unregulated. I mean, you have the sort of light touch, the landlord registration scheme. It's really, I'm not sure how many have bought into that. what you're actually saying is you're going to introduce a piece of legislation which is applied to social landlords like housing executive, housing associations. So you could have somebody who has moved out of one of those houses on an eviction order, and they could move next door into a private rented house. What is the point then of having this type of legislation if it doesn't encompass the whole social housing sector? Because up to 70% of social housing in the north is now provided by private landlords. So you're missing a huge swathe. So you're going to leave it. When we're back to what Sammy and Fra were saying, you have people who in estates and in houses who are torturing their neighbours, but they could move out, be put out of this house, but move into that one because it doesn't apply to them. That just doesn't seem logical. It's wasting time and effort. The other question was, you did say short tenancies will only be applied where it's thought that the tenant may benefit from counselling or whatever. And it's the logistics of that. I presume the like of statutory agencies like social services and that may be involved. And the logistics of getting that put in place. And presumably then, and I think it's already been addressed, if people wouldn't benefit from that, then eviction orders would be put in place eventually, the court system. But Tommy, in fairness, seems quite sceptical of in terms of the process because it takes so long. And, you know, this day-by-day invidious intrusion into other people's lives continues. Now, the other thing is, in terms of that, where the short tenancies and that are introduced, are tenants associations, residents associations, like, are they brought in, or is it envisaged that they will be brought in as witnesses? Because in my experience, a lot of the areas where this happens, the tenants associations, resident associations would be actively involved in trying to deal with it. You know, so I'm just wondering, like almost professional witnesses in that sense, to say that this is the issue that is happening and we are aware of that and could maybe give evidence to that effect and maybe give an indication of whether the short tenancy might be applicable in particular cases, because people in the area know best what's happening. We'll still go back to my point that if the private sector is not included, then it's not going to be effective, in my view, because the vast majority of cases that I've dealt with over years in terms of antisocial behaviour has come from the private rented sector, where landlords who own a house, say in the middle of Newry, and could live in the south, they could live in Belfast, they could live anywhere, and really don't have that much interest in what's going on because they don't live in the area. You know, and I have had cases where one person in particular, the landlord was living 20 miles away and his tenants were totally misbehaving. The neighbour actually went up at 4 o'clock in the morning, put his finger on the landlord's bell and kept it there until he came down and sorted it out. And that seems a bit dramatic, but for some people it sometimes seems the only way of dealing with a situation which is getting out of their control. So you know that those issues need to be addressed, I think.
Well, sorry, Deirdre.
Well, this piece of legislation is particularly, as Stephen has explained it, is particularly around social tenancies because of the nature of how social tenancies are established in law. Tenancies are different in private landlord sector, and yes, there is, as you alluded to, a landlord registration process begun, and that is under constant review to check the effectiveness of that registration process. There are measures in there if landlords, don't register or don't keep their information up to speed once the whole process has been gone through. So that we are working on trying to have a better understanding of the private rented sector market and of private landlords, as well as this piece is, you're correct, specifically designed around social housing. So it would have to be a different piece of legislation to look specifically.
No, I understand it, but with respect, we've been making this point since 2007 and we've been on this committee. You have a sector, the private rented sector, which gets probably over £200 million of public money per year in housing benefit, totally unregulated. I can't imagine that happening in any other sector. That amount of public money is paid And we're back to the same question because, again, this raises the whole anomaly of the lack of registration in terms of the private rented sector, or the lack of regulation, I should say, because it just seems ludicrous that you're going to introduce a piece of legislation which applies to to a large proportion, but the private rented sector in terms of social housing is becoming more and more. It's increasing literally by the week. If you go around to any, certainly my own constituency, it's increasing by the day.
Yeah. And the first piece of work around that sector is to have landlords register, and then we can move on to consider what further policy measures might be required after that. That is the first piece of work.
Yeah, but I suppose the point I'm making is that all needs to be done fairly quickly, because otherwise you're introducing a piece of legislation which by definition is going to be effective to a certain extent, but a large sector is going to be left unregulated and unaffected by this piece of legislation. And the reality is, it goes back to my point, you could get somebody living there, affected, moving in next door, the problem occurs.
Point made. Okay, point made. Trevor?
Some of my questions have already been asked, Chairman, but following on from the point in terms of, and the themes continuing here in terms of the bad behaviour of bad tenants, in the paragraph 5 here, Stephen, if this is not rewarding bad behaviour, so if you take the scenario where someone's actually had to be converted to short tenancy, but even if they don't take the support, really by what you're suggesting here in terms of this is that they actually still can't bring that tenancy to an end during that 6 months. So if someone has misbehaved, you've went to all that trouble to bring them into a short tenancy, and more often than not, I think even if you took a case to court, as someone else has said, the judge is more likely to force the landlord to use this measure. But even by your own definition here, in terms of your description of how this is going to work, if that bad behaviour continues or the person doesn't take up counselling, you still can't evict them for that 6 months. So how is that not rewarding bad behaviour?
The alternative to converting a secure tenancy to a short tenancy is to apply for an order for possession of the secure tenancy. It could take at least 6 months to get your order for possession of the secure tenancy due to the court process involved. If you decide to go down the route of converting to a secure tenancy, which you don't actually have to go to court to do, it's done by the expedient of the landlord serving notice
to a short tenancy. To a short tenancy?
Yes, that's right, that it's been converted to a short tenancy. Now, the tenant will have the facility to appeal that decision. We don't envisage that that would happen very often, because it's most unlikely that you would convert the tenancy unless the tenant seemed to be amenable to accepting the secure
Sorry, can I just stop you?
Package.
I mean, the difficulty I have is that we assume that these tenants are all reasonable people. The reason you would convert someone from a secure tenancy to a short tenancy is because they've been unreasonable, they've been unworkable. So in your own definition, and I would actually like to see some statistics from the housing side of how long it has taken on average to actually go through the process that you're referring to, the 6 months, because from what I have learned from speaking to individuals, it takes long, but it just doesn't take just as long as 6 months. But if what you're saying is, so let's look at the scenario again. With the bad tenant, there's an approach made to suggest to that tenant that you're going to a short tenancy. That person resists that. So you're into this parade in terms of them appealing against that decision, so that buys them more time. Then eventually they're forced to go into a short tenancy and they have another 6 months of bad behaviour before you actually can bring that tenancy to an end. So really, regardless of how you look at this, Stephen, every step you've taken in terms of how you're presenting this is actually extending the period of time that the bad tenant is there, terrorising the people on both sides.
Arguably, it could be misused by a tenant. It's going to be part of the landlord's discretion to only offer the option of a short tenancy.
It is, except before you go before the courts, when the courts will insist you give the tenant this option, because more often than not, the judges will come down on the side of the tenant as opposed to the social landlord. So regardless of every step you're taking here, the difficulty, so you take a settled development where people have lived for many years and enjoyed it, you have someone who's been put into a house who've come in to terrorise, but only because they've been moved from somewhere else, because they've been a difficult tenant. They've been put in there, there's people on either side, and every step and every part of this process that's been put in front of us now is actually making that process longer and more difficult. And those people on either side are being terrorised and can do nothing.
I take your point that the possibility of the courts trying to pressure landlords into converting to a short tenancy rather than granting an order for possession. I honestly don't think that's very likely, because the decision to convert to a short tenancy, it's a professional decision for the landlord based on their professional expertise and knowledge of the kind of scenarios that you get in social housing and what the tenant is likely to respond to. The landlord is going to know when it's correct to offer a short tenancy. That would be outside the expertise of the court. I very much doubt if the courts would insist on a landlord taking a decision like that.
I think you and I will have to disagree on that point, because experience would suggest whenever you've got a large body taking a small individual to court, whether it be housing or anything else, that the judges will always err on the side of caution and come in favour of the individual. And I mean, given that this is, given even in terms of how this is framed, whilst I don't think it would be reasonable for the judge to assume that, we will always err on that side of judgment, given that there's still an opportunity for the social landlord to take steps at a later date. But the problem with this, as it's framed today, is extending that period of time. And I mean, I think maybe, Stephen, if you spend a bit of time in some of the constituency offices that all of us are in, and actually meet some of the tenants that are actually on either sides of these people, you would understand the frustration of the individuals who are living there and living with the horror and the difficulty they actually have with some of these individuals.
I mean, I suppose, and encapsulate that, I mean, everybody is concerned that we make sure we try to have the mechanism, the means, and a reasonable time frame to deal with people who unfortunately are what may be called bad tenants, and they do torture communities in some cases. We want to make sure there's enough rights and protections built in for families who do need support and who would benefit support. But I think the frustration the members are expressing is very often when you're dealing with the cases, it does take an awful long time, and actually communities just get worn out by some of it, and actually you get good tenants want to move away from the problem, and now you just continually to reinforce the problem. So I don't know where you can truncate any of that, but still making sure the protections are built in and so on. But the outcome has to be that there's a carrot and a stick here at the end of it. And I think you're hearing members' frustration on that. I think with one more member just to speak at the moment, it's Michael.
Thanks, Chair. And I would welcome anything that alleviates or reinforces the right of people to have difficult, truculent and sometimes dangerous neighbours removed. Just a couple of points. I understood that when a social tenancy was originally granted, there was an introductory or a probationary period.
That's correct.
Now, it would strike me as strange if a drink-fuelled, drug-addled party animal suddenly moved in, behaved perfectly for 2 years, and then at the end of the introductory tenancy suddenly became disruptive, because that's not my experience. And is there any way in which the introductory tenancies could be actually strengthened? The other point is that when someone in the scenario you're describing has gone down this arduous route and is halfway through it, and the primary witness, i.e. the neighbour who is being most inconvenienced, suddenly moves, is the case closed because the primary witness or the primary complainant has gone, and does the process then have to start again? And thirdly, when people, and I know some families who, no matter where they go, there's a trail or a wake of destruction and neighbours driven almost to insanity behind them. Does there come a point where society has exhausted its obligation to actually elevate the needs of the disruptive people above the normal requirements of just the average member of society?
Right. You mentioned introductory tenancies. Some people do make it through the introductory period. They do satisfy the landlord that they would make they'd be a suitable person to hold a secure tenancy. A secure tenancy is awarded. I mean, the proof of that is the fact that the housing executive is seeking possession orders against secure tenants, not on a daily basis, but on a regular basis. Now, those are people who, in many cases, will have been introductory tenants at the outset, but they have managed to secure a secure tenancy. Something goes wrong in their lives, or for whatever reason, they start behaving badly, and the housing executive is then obliged to seek an order for possession. The short tenancy proposal is, in a sense, about reimposing an introductory tenancy on a secure tenant. The conditions of a short tenancy are somewhat analogous to an introductory tenancy, in that they are time limited, and that they are contingent on the tenant showing themselves to be suitable people to hold a secure tenancy. You'd also asked about witnesses moving away. If this is in the context of court proceedings for possession of a secure tenancy, well then yes, you do need witnesses. If the witnesses aren't prepared to go to court, then the landlord is going to have a problem with that case. Witnesses don't necessarily have to be neighbours. They can be, as Mr McCann mentioned earlier, or I think Mr Brady actually, professional witnesses who can be community representatives, or they can be actually employees of the landlord, or police officers, or a range of other professionals. So you don't necessarily have to have a neighbour prepared to testify.
And would someone, problem family, non-problem family, or citizen moves, someone else gets allocated the property? In your view, would the person who gets allocated that property, someone else having moved from it because of the behaviour of their neighbours, have any rightful expectation to being advised that they were moving into a property that the previous tenant left because of the behaviour of the neighbours? And could they then be reasonably bound on the 2-year residency or acceptance of that property before being able to qualify for a transfer?
I'm not aware that there's any legal requirement for landlords to notify prospective tenants of that type of thing. That's outside my expertise. It's a landlord, it's a housing management issue, so I couldn't honestly comment on that.
We'll check that and
Thank you.
come back to you.
I have about 7 at the moment on one development in exactly the same situation. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so, okay, thank you. There's no other members indicating to speak, if there are, I'm going to ignore them. So, I think we're happy enough members have addressed the issue well enough. No other member wants to speak at this time, so thank you for that. Jerry, could I thank yourself, Heloise and Stephen, just for your contribution this morning, your answer to some of the questions. I think it's fair enough to say you'll take on board, again, a number of the points that have been raised by members, and some of them have been repeatedly raised. So, again, I think you just get a sense of the acute awareness of members of dealing with this issue. Appreciate your efforts on that, and no doubt we'll hear you have some feedback to come back to. Is you happy enough you've made your own points this morning? Yeah, wonderful. Okay, thanks very much there for that this morning. Stephen, Jerry and Heloise. Okay, members, moving on then, we're fast rolling against the clock. Moving on then to item number 7 on the agenda. This is an update on the Building Successful Communities Programme, departmental briefing. Stephen, you're on the Yaki once again, so you're welcome, Stephen, Lawrence and Beverly. So again, just leave it to yourselves then, just to present to the committee.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try and keep this brief to allow, I know you're under time pressure, to allow as much time as possible for questions. We would be keen to come back during this 3-year programme regularly to update the committee and involve the committee as much as you wish to be involved in terms of this programme. Really, it has its genesis in the housing strategy, where the Minister set out his vision for housing over the 5-year period 2012 to 2017. And the vision really is focused on ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to access good quality housing at a reasonable cost. The strategy also recognises the role that housing can play in sustaining economic recovery, creating employment and helping to regenerate some of our most deprived and neglected communities. The strategy recognises that there are communities in decline and communities that are blighted by vacant and derelict properties, undeveloped land, poor infrastructure, antisocial behaviour, as the last presentation covered. The Minister launched, following the completion of the Housing Strategy consultation and the publication of the Housing Strategy Action Plan, the Minister launched the Building Successful Communities programme in October 2013. 6 pilot areas have been selected. Each area is affected by a different range of issues: blight, antisocial behaviour, empty homes, housing market failure, vacant land, etc. But what they all have in common is a need for physical regeneration, although the type of physical regeneration needed differs from area to area. The areas chosen for the pilot schemes are Dury Road in Ballymena, Lower Old Park and Hillview in Belfast, Tigers Bay and Mount Collier in Belfast, Lower Falls in Belfast, Lower Shankill and Brown Square, again in Belfast, and Lenadoon and Glencullen. All the pilot areas were selected and ranked on the basis that they are first and foremost areas of deprivation. 5 of them are in neighbourhood renewal areas, and the 6th, Dury Road in Ballymena, is an area at risk, so it's just outside the top 10% of most deprived wards. All have recognised indicators that justify intervention, and the problems that I've mentioned: housing market failure, vacant land, stock, blight, antisocial behaviour, etc. Over the next 3 years, the programme will aim to address that decline through a unified response, which will include government, councils, local residents, housing associations, and we see the engagement of all these partners as a key success, as key to success of the programme. And really, the programme is designed to try and develop a policy and support improvement in these areas, and sort of use action learning, developing a policy and then applying it in those 6 areas as a test case for what might be done in other areas thereafter. We are in the process of establishing forums in each of the areas, and it involves all the organisations I mentioned before, as well as the private sector and voluntary and community sector organisations. Each forum will have an objective of developing an action plan which will prioritise actions to address the particular physical, social and economic regeneration needs of the area. But different from previous programmes, the focus is very clearly on housing and physical regeneration as the catalyst to do these other things. We are in the process of procuring consultants to support the forums to identify their needs and develop solutions through community consultation and engagement. And we also have a programme board which has broad representation from statutory bodies and others to advise us on the delivery of the programme. We'll just conclude our remarks by Beverly giving just a sort of brief update in terms of our progress to date.
Okay, Chair. We've now established forums in 3 of the pilot areas. That's Lenadoon, Lower Falls and Dury Road in Ballymena. And a member of staff has been dedicated to support the work of the forums in each of those areas. We're currently finalising membership of the forums for Lower Shankill and Brown Square, Tigers Bay and Mount Collier and Lower Old Park and Hillview, and hope to host the first meeting of those forums over the next few months. We also intend to hold a seminar in September for all forums, and this will support the forums by providing best practice examples of physical, social and economic regeneration initiatives from Northern Ireland and GB. And the seminar will also provide opportunities for forum members to discuss and debate regeneration approaches. We also see this seminar as a step in supporting joint working across pilot areas and best practice sharing across pilot areas. The Department also intends to support forums in identifying the needs of each area through providing consultancy support for the development of action plans, together with community consultation and focus groups, to ensure we've got the views of communities on the housing-led regeneration needs of their areas and their priorities for action. And as Stephen has covered at this stage, we would intend that plans would focus on physical regeneration of areas, and that would include housing development and infrastructure improvements, with a focus on making areas safer by designing out crime and also improve community facilities. but they would also include proposals for both the social and economic regeneration of areas, for example, social economy projects and apprenticeship programmes. Just in conclusion, Chair, when the programme was announced in October, the Department commenced an equality screening exercise, and we're currently incorporating the amendments suggested to our first draft. So the amendments have been suggested by the Department's Equality Unit. We're currently incorporating those amends, and then we intend to seek the view on our screening document from an independent expert. We're aiming to have draft plans completed in at least 3 of the areas by March 2015, and all plans will be subject to scrutiny and approval by the Programme Board, and then a business case will then be submitted to DFP to ensure the necessary funding for the plans.
Okay, very much. Thank you, Stephen. Also, I think you'll see from our point of view there, this has been quite a time lag already from the announcement. So you're talking about doing maybe a seminar in September for all of the fora together. I think it certainly would be worth stating now that we'd want to hear maybe from you at least immediately after that seminar to see where we're at in terms of progress. But it's a tall order to deliver what you're actually saying you're going to do, so I'll be keen to see how that's going to be progressed given the kind of delay. Can you give us a wee sense of what some of the delay has already been in terms of getting the rest of the fora organised?
Yes, Chair. I mean, like any process, neighbourhood renewal, I think, took about 2 years to get up and running. We're planning to be up and running much more quickly than that because we've learned from neighbourhood renewal. Like anything, we're trying to take a bottom-up approach. We're trying to develop the policy as we go from the bottom up. So we've been trying to very much engage with people. Our staff have been engaging with MLAs in the area, councillors, community groups, to try and identify fora and make sure that the fora are properly representative and have something to offer. So that process has just naturally taken longer than we would have liked. In some areas, it's fair to say communities are perhaps more ready to engage with this. Derry Road, for example, there was already a very active community sector ready to engage with us. Divis, Lower Falls, similar, and Lenadoon. In some other areas, it's been more challenging. There's perhaps, and therein perhaps lies some of the problems. Communities are perhaps more fractured, and it's taken a little bit longer to get to that point. So in the 3 areas where we don't have forums, we're quite close to having them. But it's fair to say that there are perhaps more fault lines within those communities than there are within the 3 where we already have a forum established.
Okay, thank you for that. Jim?
Yeah, just a couple of points. In Derry Road, for example, there had been a scheme before this idea came along to buy back some properties. Now, in fact, that scheme has been stalled, it seems. So I had some constituents who were looking forward to getting properties taken off their hands because they turned into absolute disasters. And now this forum or this scheme has delayed all of that. So the ultimate objective is positive, but in the short term there seems to be a bit of a drag, which maybe is leaving some situations going backwards rather than forwards. What can you do about that?
Well, I suppose if I can say, there were residents who are involved in the forum who are actually living in that area that was scheduled for demolition. And those residents are very engaged and involved and keen to move the community on. And we felt it was important that we took their views on board, and perhaps their landlord may have a different view to them. But they were keen to remain in the area and keen to...
The cases I have in mind were actually landlords of derelict properties.
Yes. And the proposals for demolition preceded the Minister's decision around the pilot areas. And so when the decision was made that Derry Road would be one of the pilot areas, it was felt that it was best that if this group was to decide on the regeneration needs and a regeneration plan for the area, that you would include the demolition proposals, and they should reconsider those demolition proposals and take a concerted plan across the whole of the Derry Road estate.
But there are some properties where the only outcome can be demolition.
Yeah.
So why not get on with that?
Well, I suppose if you look at it, we've got 2 housing associations who will be developing the work and developing any housing proposals within that area. And they may have a different view to what the housing executive had of the plans for the area, so they need to look at take a look at the plans for the area and decide on the best development proposals, if you like, for Derry Road.
The second question was, in terms of the formality of the selection of the forum, local representatives are invited. Is that an open invitation to local representatives, or is it representatives as nominated by their council?
The invitation was to MLAs.
Yes.
And in some cases, when our staff approached MLAs, the MLAs felt that elected reps, as in council reps,
yes,
were perhaps best placed
I see.
to represent them.
I was aware
and
there were some
represent
councillors
them.
active and
Yes,
some not.
yes, and,
So
and
that's how that came
that's
about.
been a decision. We approached MLAs
Yeah.
in the first instance, and in some cases MLAs said, well, actually, this councillor knows the area better and would be better served. Also, in some areas, what we've done at the request of MLAs, for example, in Derry Road, at the request of some MLAs there, who, due to the constraints in their time, we've said, well, we could have an MLA grouping where we're happy to brief you on developments, and we're happy to feedback, if you can't attend meetings, your views to the forums.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Fra.
Sure. What I'll do is that I know quite the programmes, I think, but I'll wait until after the seminar in September, and I come back. I have a number of concerns, but I'll wait for them to be addressed after the local communities meeting.
Okay, that's an easy one. There's no other members in indicating to speak. I mean, obviously we've had some discussions about this before with yourselves, and said earlier on, my just be concern would be that we're at a very, very early stage of development, this including the fact that we don't have all the four in place. So I suppose that it does make sense then that have you back here again with your agreement then as early as we can. It probably seems logical that we wait until after the seminar, then at least maybe have the maximum amount of information as to how you might certainly have all the structures in place, and then how the particular plans may be starting to shape up for each of the areas. Is that fair enough?
Yes, that's fair enough, yeah.
Okay, so look, can I thank yourselves, Lawrence, Stephen and Beverly, for being here this morning. I know you maybe had to wait for a short meeting, but apologise for that. Okay, so okay, members, moving on. Opposed, subordinate, 2, 4, 5. All right, so moving on to item number 8 then. That's proposed subordinate legislation. What one I have here? Regarding I would read enough this here, so where are we? Business improvement. Okay, it's all right. Let me find this. Okay, so it's the draft statutory rule of business improvement districts. Look at page 84 on your packs, members. The Department has made a statutory rule under the powers conferred by the Business Improvement Districts Act 2013. Regulations will provide further detail on the power of veto by council over a bid proposal. The rule is subject to a draft affirmative resolution procedure. If members are content, then I can read the members are. I take it members are content. They are. Then I read formally into the record that the Committee for Social Development has considered the draft statutory rule, the Business Improvement Districts General Regulations Northern Ireland 2014, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules reports, recommends that it be affirmed by the Assembly. All agreed?
Agreed.
Great, thank you. Moving on then to the next SR 143, Business Improvement Districts again, General Regulations. Again, this is on page 95 of your pack. The rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure before the Assembly and will come into operation on the 1st of July 2014. If the members have no objection, then I read formally in the record. Members content that I read in the record? Okay then, so we have that the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 143 2014 and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report has no objection to the rule. Agreed? Okay, thank you for that, member. I come back now to 7, am I? Item number 8. Back to number 8. So we'll go back to number 8 and on page 18 of your tabled items, members. This is the Social Security Maternity Allowance Miscellaneous Amendments. The committee had, just to remind ourselves, we had queries around this piece of supporting legislation, particularly with reference to what exactly it means for a woman to take care of her health. And I think we had asked for officials to attend and clarify that this morning. So, can I formally welcome then Michael Pollock and Rosemary Hughes to the committee this morning. Very welcome. I know you've been very patient, Jerry, waiting here all morning. So
thank you, Chair.
A half day off work, I suppose, for the weddings. Okay, so Michael, can I welcome yourself and Rosemary here this morning? Again, I think you're just aware without any further ado what the queries actually were.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies, Anne McCleary was due to be here, but she was called away to somewhere else. So you've ended up with myself and Rosemary in that respect. Yes, I think the committee were seeking some clarification, basically on the Social Security Maternity Allowance, the consequential amendments that we were putting through in respect of these particular regulations. With regards to what constitutes an expectant mother taking due care of her health, I think it might be useful if I just went through the sort of sequencing in respect to this. These regulations that we're discussing here today, as I mentioned, are consequential amendments brought about by an amendment to the maternity allowance that introduced a new group earlier on in the year, and the committee would have had sight of those, where basically it extended the provision of maternity allowance to participative wives or civil partners of self-employed, for example, sort of farmers' wives or whatever. These regs are essentially updating those regulations to reflect the same conditions that exist for anyone in receipt of maternity allowance. Now, you raised an interesting point insofar as what constitutes due care, and I have to say that it's not defined in legislation anywhere. We've had a check around. The provision has effectively been in effect since about 1948. As far as we can trace, it was brought about when maternity allowance wasn't actually paid by states, but it was paid by members of societies. So it was a reasonable provision that was, or a condition that was put on receipt of maternity allowance, and it has been carried forward since then. In reality, it's a provision that's very rarely, if ever, invoked. We've been checking since we got your actual query, and I don't think we've been able to find instances where
identify any situation where a disqualification has been imposed because of this. The problem being that it would be almost impossible to prove that a pregnant woman had not taken due care of her health. Once the maternity allowance is claimed and benefit is put into payment, that's really it as far as the decision maker is concerned. There's no sort of, to and fro and checking up on the health of the claimant beyond obviously what their own GP would be involved with. So we have discovered that actually, certainly in the last 27 years, there has not been a disqualification imposed as a result of this.
And all that said, the obvious question is why have it at all? I do think in that regard that it's quite reasonable that the state or government would expect expectant mothers to take due care of their health. Now, what that constitutes, as I say, isn't defined in legislation, but it isn't unreasonable for government to promote good health in that regard. And as I say, in that respect, all sort of communiques with expectant mothers would be handing out leaflets in respect of this is what you would ordinarily expect someone with your condition to adhere to. Like, it's not a good idea to drink or whatever. But we are checking with DWP to see if they have some deeper meaning as to why it is in statute. But essentially, it is there It's a reasonable provision, I would contend, but there hasn't been any cases that we know of in terms of disallowance in that regard.
I think with all due respect, Michael, it might sound a good idea, but a good idea can't be translated into legislation. You can't give us an example over the past 27 years, so I think most of us would contend it's not reasonable. If it was reasonable, there would be some definition to it, so maybe there is a deeper meaning. There's a deeper meaning to life as well, I suppose, but
I think it may originally
I think my difficulty would be, I'm supposed to support a piece of legislation which nobody can actually define. So I simply ask myself a question, what is the point?
This particular piece of legislation that you're talking about is in respect of applying that same conditionality that applies to everyone in receipt of maternity allowance. So it is only in respect of the participative wives or civil partners, the group that was, if you like, brought into the fold in that respect. As far as reasonableness, I don't see it as being unreasonable that you would expect government not to promote good health in that respect.
I'm not disputing that, but maybe a good idea, and maybe the right thing to do, but you can't define it. So we'll have this discussion all day long, and in fact, it's interesting that you had to go off and check what it actually might mean when the committee queried that some people would be put into this particular nebulous, undefined category. But Mickey Brady was one of the members who raised it. Paula Bradley was also concerned about it this morning, and other members would have raised it as well. So we'll let Mickey in first of all, then Megha wants to come in.
The difficulty I have, it talks about a woman shall be disqualified for receiving maternity allowance under Section 35 or 35B of the 1992 if during the maternity allowance period she fails without good cause. Who defines good cause? It's an arbitrary issue.
There is no definition of good cause.
Yeah, exactly, and that's been around for more than 27 years, in my experience.
Good cause has, yes.
Then goes on to say, if at any time before she is confined she fails without good cause to attend for, again, an arbitrary decision made by the civil servant who just happens to be dealing with the case at the time, because there's no definition. And that's why it's so nebulous. You know, and to say that there has been no example of it, that doesn't mean there could be one in the morning if this legislation's been brought in.
No, I mean, that's absolutely right, but the evidence shows that there have been no disqualifications on either of these grounds that we can track down. As a result of the queries that you raised, we contacted our colleagues in DWP, and they find the same thing. We're currently with them trying to uncover what the policy rationale is behind this at the outset.
Well, I think that's what we're trying to uncover.
Yeah.
And with respect, the fact that they don't have a definition, that's remiss of them, and has been for, let's just say, 27 years. Because
what I would say, Maggie, would be that if you didn't apply this consequential amendment, what you would have in effect would be two different sets of claimants in receipt of maternity allowance that would different conditionality would apply to.
I'm not disputing that, but that doesn't mean that this is right.
No,
it also
absolutely.
means that the other is equally as wrong in that sense, because there's been no definition. And simply because it hasn't been applied does not mean it can't be applied or wouldn't be applied. Well, you know as well as I do, Michael, people will make arbitrary decisions based on good cause, or what they consider as not good cause. I mean, for instance, if a woman on religious grounds decided that she needed, or the medical people decided she needed a blood transfusion and she didn't want to take it, would that constitute good, without due care for her health?
The evidence shows that it would constitute good cause, but I would say, in terms of good cause, that's a phrase that's common in terms of social security legislation.
Oh, no, that's the enforcement part of it.
But I would contend that there isn't civil servants sitting there waiting for an excuse for this election.
Could I ask, Michael, because part of the problem I have here, we could give different examples, and I don't think we should get down that road. I think members have actually highlighted what they believe to be an anomaly. I think that's been borne out by yourself saying you can't even find a definition, and there's certainly been no deployment of this thing for 27 years at least. Now, for me, I'm asking myself a question: if that regulation isn't approved, what's the net effect? to anybody?
Well, the net effect, as I said to Mickey, is that you have two different groups effectively in receipt of maternity allowance with different conditionality. In practice, to the individuals, you won't see a difference. But in terms of keeping your social security legislation on the straight and narrow, what I would suggest is that as the evidence shows that nobody has been disallowed or disadvantaged through this, that you leave that with us as you rightly point out, an anomalous sort of situation. Due care in respect of your health, as I say, I would still contend that that's a legitimate aim, and it's something that certainly Health and everybody else would try to promote. But I would say that there is guidance out there in terms of general medical council guidance and everything else, that what constitutes good practice in terms of an expectant mother. Now, that isn't enshrined in legislation, but it might be in guidance somewhere that we haven't actually unearthed yet.
The difficulty for us as legislators and to approve of this is very simple. First hand, it hasn't been applied in your town of 27 years. You cannot give us a definition.
No.
So whether or not you bring in another group or you have a different categorisation, it's not going to have a net effect. Either there's only two outcomes of this. Either it will continue to have no impact on any individual claimant whether this is passed or not, or, as Mickey Brady says, and I tend to fear the latter here because of the current government in London keep changing the goalposts, and I have no doubt that they will continue to promote arbitrary decisions. I may be wrong on that, that's my view. So, yeah, they have two outcomes of passing this thing here, which will either be that it'll continue to be not applied because it has no meaning, there's no definition, it hasn't been applied in your town for 27 years, or somebody's going to start trying to apply something to it, and I'm not prepared to support a bit of legislation which gives somebody a blank page to do something, and you can't tell me what that blank page may be filled up by. So that's my dilemma. But I want to bring in...
If your interpretation is correct, then under the current legislation, from what you're saying, Michael, that draconian interpretation could be applied to a group which is not included in this regulation at all, and not applied to the group which is included in this regulation, and that's where the anomaly creeps in.
Yes.
If, and in practice would seem to indicate that it's not applied at all, but at least the legislation is uniform.
But you could also take an annulment of the other.
You know, I think that's where I would come from. You know, as the member points out, if you decided not to approve this, this will apply to the new grouping that came in, that was where maternity allowance was extended to. As I say, partners of self-employed people, civil partners and the like, that new grouping. That's what this consequential amendment applies to. Would it not be, well, my intention would be that it would be better for us to resolve the anomaly, as you would see it, for the recipients of maternity allowance, so that in any future amendments to maternity allowance regulations, the entire group could be captured.
But you would also address an anomaly by just removing it because it's a meaningless, there is no definition. So
but you're only removing it for that small group.
Yeah, well I'm saying, but why not go back to the big drawing board and remove it for everybody? But anyway, that's a view. We're going to barter about this all day. Mickey Brady, have a number of members want to come in.
The other group is self-employed women.
Yeah.
Who may well, who are paying contributions, who may well be regarded differently. This group are the partners of self-employed people.
Yeah.
They're in a different category in that sense. So if this were introduced, they will be in an arbitrary way treated differently. And essentially, Michael, what you're saying is, in a sense, two wrongs don't make a right.
Correct.
You know, so that's, you know, so if this isn't applied, then really what you'd want the government to do is go back and look at the other group and apply it in an equitable fashion to them as well as this group, because what this has done.
And well, that's what we're saying. This provision has been in force, and going back as far as 1987.
Yeah.
We can't identify anybody that's been disadvantaged or
with
disallowed
respect,
by it.
we didn't have the opportunity this committee in 1987 to scrutinise it.
1987.
To scrutinise it, you know?
Recognise that, but as I say, we got the committee's query at the start of the week, and naturally enough, it takes a bit of time to unravel those sorts of things.
I mean, sorry, as you know, these regulations are not just imposing disqualifications, possible disqualifications in relation to this area. It would also be if the woman, the wife or the civil partner of a participating spouse took up their own employment or
Yes, I understand
self-employment.
that, yeah.
So there's more to the amending
But they go into a different
regulations than
category
just
then.
this area. But when it would come to this area, it really is a test of reasonableness. And it is, now I know again, you know, that's a matter of opinion. What that basically means is it's going to be extremely difficult for any decision maker to prove that a woman is not taking due care of her health or has not shown good cause for failing to attend medical examinations. There would have to be actual factual evidence in front of them in order for that to be able to proceed. So it's understandable why disqualification has not happened on those grounds. But I mean, I take your point that
But
if
why
it's
is it needed
there,
then? Why is this-
what's the point of it being
Well,
there?
there's wee
Yes.
pointers there about attending checkups and things like that, you know, things that you would normally...
You're starting to make them up as you go along, Michael. No disrespect to you. So
I'm hoping to be
I take it, Michael.
I'm just saying, there are some guidance out there. There's general medical guidance. There are things that expectant mothers. There's all manner of leaflets in any health centre that will tell you what's good practice effectively if you find out that you're...
That's exactly what I was going to ask, Michael. For example, if an expectant or recently delivered mother smoked tobacco or drank alcohol to excess or abused substances, could, under this legislation, that be interpreted as failing to take good care of her health?
Yes, but how could we prove that? That's the point.
Well,
you know.
let's say, for example, you had a disability living allowance claim on the basis of COPD by tobacco, or a ESA, incapacity for work due to consumption.
It is not accepted good practice for pregnant women to smoke.
Yes.
That's a widely acknowledged fact.
If that was established-
Whether that would constitute someone disallowing a maternity allowance, no, I don't think it would. That's the simple...
Why?
But can you say
Why?
for everybody it's going to evaluate this?
Well, she might smoke one a day. She might smoke
Might be sufficient.
100 a day. It might be sufficient. But I'm saying the application of this is not draconian in the sense that, as I say, it's not being used in any way for to actually disallow expectant mothers or deprive them of maternity allowance. The evidence shows that nobody's been penalised for 27 years, and I don't think it will be.
My concerns are always just driven by real experience, because whenever officials come here and then tell us some time ago, just the last 12 months, in terms of the welfare reform and all the rest of that, you know, maybe if someone makes a claim and commitment and they don't have their hair properly cut, then they could be told by one of your officers to cut their hair before you go to interviews. Otherwise, you'll have your claim disallowed. That scares me.
Yeah.
And that leaves you an area of arbitrary decision making that I don't like. Now, we all have a view that we want to have a common sense approach to these things, and yes, we want to make sure that people are promoted to having due care of their health and all the rest of that, but when you haven't got it defined, then
I
I say to myself,
absolutely
I can't accept
that, Chair. But I would say that I'm always open and frank with you.
I appreciate that.
If I think something's a problem, and I think this is an anomalous situation, which we will resolve, we will attempt to resolve with DWP, but I don't think it's a problem.
Okay, no, fair enough, I appreciate that. So, Stuart?
Chair, I understand that in essence what we were told on the basis of the historical evidence, this isn't a problem. Why not go back to DWP and tell them it's not a problem, and in fact we should take everybody that's in the category out of it altogether if it's not a problem either in Northern Ireland or in the UK, because I thought one of the aims of the current government was to deal with red tape. And why do we need to have regulations that are never applied?
We don't necessarily, and that's what I'm saying. We are looking at the rationale and the policy intent behind the particular provisions. If there is a deeper meaning I'm quite happy to write back to the committee and say, yes, this is what we found or unearthed in that regard.
I think it may not have been recognised in the past because people were not being disqualified under this, so therefore it was never identified. It is only now, since members had raised the query, that it has actually been identified.
Having been identified, I don't think I'm prepared to support it at this stage until we get the full intent of it.
Well, we are in touch with DWP colleagues to you know, to see what can happen. Yes.
The wee issue you have, because I mean, I share the view, Stuart, I mean, the difficulty we have to address here, it's not a difficulty, it's just a choice. This rule will come into effect in, I'm looking for 24th of June, is that right? So unless we would seek to pray against it, if we're against the regulation, I have to say my basic concern is I don't like giving approval of something when nobody can tell me what it actually means. And given the drift of policies from London, I'd just be concerned about that. So I wouldn't be prepared as an individual member to give support to something which can be open to potential, certainly arbitrary decision making without any definition. So I know and I very much appreciate that you're making the efforts and you've been aware of this problem with DWP. So we have to really have to take a decision as to whether or not we can support this or not. I get a sense rendering that that support may not be forthcoming, but we'll put it forward if it needs to be. So just looking at a bit of time guidance.
I think that has to be balanced against, first of all, do we want to have people who are in the same situation treated differently because this regulation only applies to a small group who are added in now to maternity benefit, as opposed to the main group who would still be subject to this because it's not even before us.
Yeah.
Secondly, the commitment from the department to look at it and to seek a way of resolving the anomaly. And it seemed to me if you don't apply the regulation, then why have the regulation? But if we're not going to have a regulation, don't have it for anybody.
Yeah.
And if that requires a bit of time to resolve that and to ensure that it applies across the board, then I think it's a small price to pay to have the thing go through, but with the understanding that any anomaly will be addressed. I mean, I think it's a less defensible position to say, by the way, we are not going to accept this regulation in respect of this small group, but because it's not before us, we'll tolerate it for a bigger group. And especially since it seems to have little consequence in the immediate period anyway, because it's not being applied.
Well, I mean, I'm going to bring Maggie Brady in, but it seems to me there are no consequences, so there's no risk that I can see. So I don't have a problem having that anomaly. I actually think it gives us better leverage to go back to the DWP and say fix this for everybody. But anyway, that's just my view. Maggie Brady, I wanted to take a last speaker.
I'm almost touched by Sammy's faith in the system to actually rectify bad legislation. And with respect, if this goes through, there's absolutely no guarantee. This may only affect a small group of people, but it flags up the issue, which may then, what I would be asking the department to look at is the bigger group and change the legislation for them. You know, because there's absolutely no faith in the sense that they would go and look at this, as you say, let it go through, it goes through, end of story. They'll not change it. I'm not in my experience in 40 years of dealing with benefits, that they would actually even consider looking at it again. If it goes through, and that's it, end of story.
Could I just say, irrespective of whether it goes through or not, due care to your health would not be defined in legislation. No. It would only be in guidance. You can't be prescriptive in the same way that you can't define good cause in legislation.
Could I ask you a question, Michael? We talked about smoking. If a pregnant woman smokes 2 cigarettes a day, and a normal one smokes 40, what's good cause? You know, that's the problem.
Individual cases would all be...
Okay, I mean, I don't want to make it into subjective deliberation because there is no definition, so Michael, in fairness, can't give you an answer in real terms. I mean, if no other member then wants to speak on this here, there certainly are objections, it seems to me, around the table on this, so what I'm supposed to do then is to read out the motion for the record, which will be, I can do this in two ways. I can just read out the motion, which will be no objection to the rule, and that'll be yea or nay, and then if not, then I'll put another motion. But I'm advised you can do the motion all together on the basis that there are objections. Okay. So I'll read this out. That the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 140 2014, the Social Security Maternity Allowance Miscellaneous Amendments Regulations Northern Ireland, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report. Sorry. Right, let me do this again. Thanks, Anthony. The Social Security Maternity Allowance Miscellaneous Amendments Regulations Northern Ireland 2014, and recommends that it be annulled by the Assembly. Those in favour? That's annulment now. Stuart, do you listen to the... Stuart, are you with us?
No. Not in favour.
Not in favour? Oh, so you're okay. So those in favour, 3, and those against. Okay. That motion falls. Okay, so where does that leave us in terms of the...
Chair, if you look the next motion, it'll be the same. It'll be the same
vote, I presume. So, I mean, I'll read then in the record just the original motion that the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 140 2014, the Social Security Maternity Allowance Miscellaneous Amendments Regulations Northern Ireland, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, and there's no objections to the rule. All in favour? 2. Those against? 3. So the motion falls.
Chair, because of the first motion was prior to annul, it wasn't supported. The rule will come into force in any case on that basis on the 24th of June, because there will be no motion going to the House for debate on the power of annulment.
But it's up to anybody. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Sorry, it came into operation on the 18th of May. It was the end of the stat period. It was the 24th.
Sorry, end of stat period. Sorry, end of statutory period is 24th, which means that you would have, the committee would have, that's why there was a need to take a vote on the power of annulment today to get into the House, so that the committee, that statute period.
Okay, so I mean, I presume it's up to anybody then if they want to take it to the floor of the House, then we'll do that. Okay, members, thanks for that little complicated little diversion, almost.
45 minutes.
Okay then, so we're moving on to the next number 9 then, the SL1, the child support regulations on page 33 of your table item folder there. I think there are 3 or 4 in your table folders. These are all really to do with CMED. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Michael. Thank you, and Rosemary. Thanks very much. So, just probably quickly run through these. Okay, so SL1, this child support and existing case, that's page 33. So are members contented that SL1 be agreed? Okay. Moving on. SL1, the child support consequences and miscellaneous amendments. It's on page 47 of your table items folder. Again, just take it that people have actually had an opportunity to read those. Are members contented for the rule to be made? Thank you. Moving on then to the next item, number 11, the SL1, the child support fees regulations, page 54 of your table items folder. Members contented for the rule to be made? Thank you. We've dealt with the business improvements. We're moving on then to SR, this is 14, item 14. SR 150, 2014 Job Seekers Allowance Schemes, page 129 of your pack. If you remember, the SL1 pertaining to these regulations was considered by the committee at the meeting on the 3rd of April. A number of members are concerned about the proposals. could result in further sanctions being applied to claimants and job seekers, and the committee agreed to defer consideration and seek further clarification. The committee was briefed then by officials on the 1st of May, at which time some members expressed continuing concerns that proposal could potentially target more vulnerable people in a potential action. So the Department has advised that the regulation will provide a legal framework for job seekers allowance claimants participation in the Department for Employment Learning's new employment programme Steps to Success, which is replacing the employment programme Steps to Work from the 2nd of June. Cover note is in your pack. The rule is subject to negative resolution before the Assembly. And given that there has been division on this, the committee, just making this point, I can't agree on whether rules should be made, and you may wish to want to put it to a vote. So if members content then, I'll put this to a vote of the committee, because clearly there's a difference of opinion. So this is the job seekers allowance. This is the job seekers allowance schemes for I'm not going to go rehearse all that.
No,
There's pretty some discussion about that. So just going to read into the motion and in the record that the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 150, the job seekers allowance schemes for assisting persons to obtain employment, and recommend that it be annulled by the Assembly. And that's on the basis that there's been division on this before. The members understand then that we've been asked to basically reject the regulation and seek a prayer of annulment in the Assembly. Okay, so on that basis then, those in favour of the motion? Okay. Those against? Okay, members, so that's, that motion has been supported. Okay, so moving on then to correspondence, item number 15, that's on page 151 of your pack. Can I just take it that people have read the document, read the correspondence memo? Members content then to note the correspondence as per the memo. Okay, members, thank you for that. Then item 16, the forward work programme. What we have in front of us is on page 14 of the table down folder, but just to note that these things do change, and we've already discussed earlier on some possible change dates and so on. So members content to note the forward work programme, and on the basis it will be amended. Okay, members, so members then content then we now suspend the meeting, and we have to reconvene in room 21, if I recall. At 1:30, lunch will be served. We're here.
Here.
1 o'clock, lunch will be served here. Then we're resuming room 21 for the result of the inquiry. Thank you, members.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room.
Session now. I think we're in closed session. No, we're not. Oh, no, we're not. Okay. Good behaviour then. All right. Okay, members. So the same rules then and procedures normally apply then. Just members should be mindful of the protocols around the use of electronic tablets and so on, and both telephones and so on. Members will recall then we are resuming the inquiry. This is the this evidence section in relation to phase 2 of the inquiry. I'll draw your attention to tab A on your inquiry folder, which there and others have put together for us very kindly, and page 281 of your meeting pack. And we have Professor Peter Roberts here, the chair of the Audit Committee of the Housing Executive, and Donald Houlis, of course, the chair of the Housing Executive, who we've met on quite a number of occasions. And obviously we're addressing phase 2 of the inquiry, and that's the issue around the adequacy of actions proposed by the Minister for DSD and the Housing Executive to address previous well-documented failings in relation to procurement and contract management. So it's quite an extensive, in a sense, certainly range of issues, but nevertheless, it's probably we've been trying to knuckle down in a way to say, well, there have been a number of well-documented failings. There's been a number of inspections and so on of that, and recommendations flowing from those. And really what we need to try to ascertain is, have all of those recommendations been adopted? Are they effective? Are they being implemented? Will they be effective? And give us some assurances around that. Obviously, members will have all of their own relevant questions they want to ask. So I think is normally the practice here whenever we invite witnesses to the inquiry. you are made aware in advance, of course, in terms of procedural fairness, what the issues would want to be dealing with yourselves in respect of, and have given yourselves the opportunity to address that at the outset and then open to members' questions. Is that fair enough?
That's absolutely fine.
Okay, Don, so thank you. And Peter, thank you again for your presence here today. And I know there's Peter's trying to catch a flight, so we will, within that, try to be reasonable in our own time frame. Okay, we're happy enough? All right, over to you, Donald.
Thank you very much. First of all, can I thank the committee for arranging the meeting this afternoon? It is actually greatly appreciated, so thank you very much for that. We have submitted a written paper to you, and I will just pick up some of the points from it rather than go through all of it. I think I just want to emphasise that Peter and I know that good governance is critical to the Housing Executive's success. And we do have a positive story of progress in moving on from the past. And that's really what we want to say today. But it is a journey with a lot more to do. And equally, we don't want to forget at all that we're here to provide more social homes, to work with our tenants, and to maintain, improve, and at times remodel tenants' homes so all live in good quality accommodation. That's our role. Our role is to work within the framework set by the department. Within that, the board is there to set the direction, the priorities and plans for the future. It's also responsible for performance. And we're answerable to all stakeholders from tenants through to the Minister. We are there to hold management to account. That is very much our role. The board has to have an overview of the work of the Housing Executive to see the bigger picture and to assess performance. But it also needs to spend time understanding the problems that we face and those issues and actually discuss them so that we're better informed. What we have done is reviewed the scheme of delegation from the board to managers. We passed back responsibility down so we can see that bigger picture. We have simplified the structures and the organisation. We've reorganised the agendas of board meetings, and we have held board away days every 6 months where the board spends more time together to work together and to have speakers from outside the Housing Executive to explain what they do and how they work so that we are better informed as a board about possible ways forward for ourselves. We've reviewed our own board effectiveness. We did that a year ago. We've revisited it this April. So we check to see that what we're doing is working, that we do what we have said we would do. In other words, we're engaged in a process of renewal of the organisation. You've already heard about the Journey to Excellence, the Leadership Forum. I have played an active part in both. And one of the things that I've done in my chairmanship to date is to visit the offices and talk to staff. I'm told this morning I've done 27 offices because I actually enjoy talking to the staff about the issues that they face and how they're working and what they find the problems are. Now, if I could turn back to the concerns on governance, of course, go back a long way to 2010. It's a legacy that has to be managed and resolved. And we're totally committed as a board to reducing all the outstanding issues. And I think there are two big reasons for that. Because we want to be the best at what we do is the first one. But the second is because of the Housing Executive staff. They have been subject to continuous and intense scrutiny and checking. It's wearing for them. It makes all staff risk averse. That inhibits the innovation of the organisation. And any organisation needs that. And we need the creativity of those staff to do better. So we need to change the culture and the way we work there. There is much more to do. On asset management, we need to, again, as a board, to check that the staffing structures and the skills that we have are the right ones to make sure that they work effectively. We also are looking to ensure that our procurement processes are the best that it could be. And are we delivering our programmes is a key issue for us. The board, in other words, has to be constantly vigilant and challenging of the management. That's what we're doing, that's where we are now, and it's what we want to continue to do. We are doing much better, and we're striving to be the best again. And what I want to do now is to pass to Peter, who will tell you what the Audit and Risk Committee are doing within that framework.
Okay, thank you. And again, can I just add my thanks, because it was principally my fault that we couldn't make your earlier date. I needed to take my wife to hospital. She's been receiving quite intensive treatment. So thank you for accommodating us this afternoon. I'm very grateful. I took responsibility for the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee as from the start of the 2013-14 financial year. And really, all I can do is to reflect on what we've done over the past year. The annual report over that year, it will be available in the next month, and obviously you'd be welcome to see a copy of it. When I took charge of the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, we did three things. First of all, we acknowledged at that point in time that we needed to restructure our committees. Until that point in time, we had two committees, Audit Committee and Risk and Performance Committee, working separately. They weren't working in harmony. There's always a big danger when you've got two committees who've assumed that each other is doing something, that things slip down the gaps, or that you duplicate, or that you overlap. So we decided to bring the two committees together, and that was agreed by the board. So what I inherited was a unified committee concerned with both audit and risk. And since then, what we've been trying to do is to move them forward. The second thing we did at that point in time was to initiate a review of what the terms of reference should be. At that point in time, very helpfully, we had three sources of expert guidance, best practice guidance available to us. Firstly, the National Northern Ireland Audit Office guidance, which was extremely helpful. Secondly, DFP guidance. And thirdly, HM Treasury guidance. So what we did was to refresh the terms of reference for this new committee on the basis of best practice guidance at the very leading edge. That review involved a number of people, both from within and out with the executive, and the people out with were principally from Northern Ireland Audit Office and DSD and elsewhere within government. That set of terms of reference were developed and agreed by the committee on the 9th of October 2013 and recommended to the board, who accepted the recommendation and approved the terms of reference on the 29th of October. So we put the terms of reference in place. The third item was that these measures, plus a review of the membership, which I'll come to in a second, therefore provided a much stronger platform for the scrutiny role of the Audit and Risk Assessment Committee. The second thing which I'd like to draw your attention to is that in parallel with the reconstitution of the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, and in accord again with good government principles and practice, the review of committee membership took place. Now, given the new mandate that the committee had, the review suggested that we needed to strengthen the committee's competence in relation to governance and risk. We took that forward because we had a retirement of one of the existing audit specialist members, and what we've done is to appoint an additional member, a non-executive additional member to the committee, a chap called J.P. Irvin, who's the Company Secretary and Counsel General of TransLink, as an additional non-executive specialist member to the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. He complements the skills already performed by Dean Morris, who's an audit specialist. The third thing which I'd like to draw to the committee's attention is that additionally, in order to ensure that audit and risk matters are dealt with correctly and expeditiously, and without any fear that internal audit or other reports have been subject to undue management alteration or editing, the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee discussed and agreed a new set of procedural structures on the 15th of January this year. And again, we took that to board for approval, and board approved this new process for the submission of reports at its meeting on the 29th of January. So I think at this point in time, Chair, I would just simply conclude that I think Audit and Risk Assurance Committee is now fit for purpose. It's much more proactive than in the past in terms of seeking matters to be subject to audit and to risk assessment. And it also has the necessary skills to allow it to discharge those functions. Again, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for that. Before I bring in members, just as 2 points I've raised myself. First of all, I think there would be some view, probably fairly widely held view, that a lot of the procedures actually were in place over the years, and in fact they were not applied, so personnel didn't apply them. And notwithstanding the fact that you have new procedures and additional procedures in place, you're satisfied that they will be protected against non-application, if we can use that diplomatic word, of procedures. And secondly, in terms of, are you satisfied that the department end of additional work that they may have undertaken would be complementary to your own measures? Tactics on both sides here and all this.
Right, can I take the second first? I am assured of that because I've taken steps to make sure that the departmental representative, Donald Heaney, is more involved in the work of the committee and agenda setting than in the past, and also more fully, even though he has observer status because of the structural relationship, even though he has an observer status, we do make sure that he is fully involved in our discussions, and also is now in the position where he's asked to take away matters and report back. So I think the department does stand behind us on those matters. We also, obviously, on another strand of work, we do gain further reassurance from the department's reviews of our own processes and procedures, and we are held to account by the department. On your first question, I think the evidence is that the process is now working. I'm, by background, a planner, and planners are often guilty of producing wonderful plans which get stored away on shelves and look very neat and nice. But really, the essence of any process or plan is its application, its implementation. Two things which are worth noting here. Firstly, as part of the new process and procedures which have been agreed and implemented, I have regular meetings with the two people you talked to last week, the head of internal audit and the head of corporate assurance unit. And I have regular meetings with them out with the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee to make sure that progress has been made. Secondly, I think the real proof of the pudding is in the products, and only today I've received 2 pieces of work which the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee asked for at its last meeting to be brought forward prior to the next meeting because we saw them as important matters, and those 2 reports have now been produced. So I think the process is working. It's delivering what we wanted in terms of timely rather than retrospective reports. We want reports on issues which we've seen as potential problems, and we want reports as early as possible so we can avoid what might be a minor difficulty becoming a major problem. So I'm very, very keen that we don't simply store stuff up behind the dam of failing to recognise those problems.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
So you tell us now everything is good, lots of checks and balances, and all is well. If this committee had asked your predecessors the same question 5 years ago, might we have got the same answer?
You may well have got the same answer. Whether they would have the same confidence that the answer is the answer that is justified by the evidence would be a different matter. You'd have to ask them the question.
Yeah. So in terms of the confidence we should repose in what you're telling us now, how, for example, could we be assured that the Audit Committee is receiving unaltered reports, given there was a history in the past of altering reports before they got to the Audit Committee? How could we be assured that there's no opportunity or possibility of that still happening?
I mean, you're tempting me into the land of trying to assume that everything is possible And yes, it is. I accept that. I accept that even with the best checks and balances in the world, it is still possible for people to operate out with the conventions and principles agreed which represent good practice. So I accept that. The analogy I always draw is that, you know, it's fine and dandy having wonderful fire insurance, but you still need to make sure the kids aren't smoking in bed. And that is why, first of all, I do have regular meetings with the head of internal audit, private meetings with the head of internal audit, and I normally look him in the eye and ask him if there are any issues which he's concerned about above and beyond the normal process that he wants to convey to me. And I will continue to ask her or him that question as head of internal audit. Equally, I ask the same question of the head of the corporate assurance unit. Secondly, the procedures within the formal management structures are noted and minuted, and they're changed as well. And those procedures would make it more difficult for things to be altered. However, to be honest, Mr. Allister, I would have to agree with you that it is always possible if people are going to be totally devious and wish to subvert any process, however well-intentioned, however well-supported, and however well-pleased, they can get around these things.
How far have the personnel changed?
Pardon?
How far have the personnel changed?
There have been some alterations in terms of the staff in internal audit and also in corporate assurance unit. Not extensive at this stage, but there have been some minor alterations.
Was anyone ever removed from position because of any of the findings in any of the reports which drew attention to these matters?
I have not in my time as chair of the Audit and Risk Assessment Committee, Risk Assurance Committee. However, I think, you know, if you wanted to review the personnel, we could do that and get back to you. But I don't have the personnel statistics for the two units in front of me today.
Mr. Hoodwas, the series of reports which find all sorts of deficiencies were essentially awaiting you when you arrived in office. And we're now asked to believe that things are so much better and different. But if we take the example of, and I don't want to stray needlessly, but I think it is relevant. If we take the example of the 18 million overcharging, we had you as chairman coming out and very robustly declaring that to be a fact. We now understand that it's looking anything but a fact. So how did the processes which you now stand over allow that situation to evolve?
I think I don't entirely agree with how you put that. The board were advised that it was 18 million. I didn't make that figure up.
No, but under a process of investigation initiated by you.
No, that was not a process. The plan maintenance contracts were ongoing. There was an issue when I arrived that had been going on since 2010 to the board about overpayments. I think what I would say...
Sorry, your statement of the 10th of June last year said, when I took up office in November 2012, was briefed in the Housing Executive Management of Plan Maintenance contracts by the Minister. I requested in December a comprehensive investigation, etc. Yes. And it was that comprehensive investigation that threw up the 18 million.
Yeah, yes. And
so you had oversight of that?
Well, the board have oversight of it, and
yes,
I'm the chair.
You're the chairman.
And the object was to resolve that issue. As far as the Housing Executive is concerned, we have resolved it. We've reached agreement with the contractors. The matter is now with the department and the DfE.
Well, then tell us, was there overcharging, as you claimed, of 18 million?
I think it would be premature of me to make comments about an agreement that we have with the contractors before it's been agreed formally.
If it turns out, Mr. Hoodwas, that the process that you trumpeted, and you trumpeted the 18 million, and it's some very robust things to say about it, if it turns out that that process doesn't stand up to scrutiny, what does that tell us about the value of the processes now in place that you put in place?
I think you will need to wait to see whether that is.
That's an easy cop-out.
I will look. You've interrupted. I was going to carry on to say that the processes we have put in are to change some of the structures of the department, so they're brought together. All maintenance is now in one place. I mentioned to you that the board have asked to ensure that that department has the right level of staffing and skills, which is underway. I've made it quite clear that we think we are doing better, but it's a long road ahead to be the best, and it's a journey that we're on. So it would be wrong to say that we were black and now we're white. It is a process of movement forward in a positive way. That is what we're about.
But if I could put it to you another way, if it turns out that you got that wrong, what confidence should this committee have in you getting other things right in running the housing executive?
You'll have to wait to see whether I have actually got it wrong. I didn't get it wrong. The figures were given to the board.
By you?
No, the 18 million.
On your
was a
instructions?
report. No, come on. We, as the board, have oversight. The board and I asked specifically that they determine exactly what they consider the overpayments to be. That is the figure that came back. It's not my figure.
Well, you were confident enough to go on the radio and talk about it.
I haven't been on the radio to talk about it.
You were in Radio Ulster back then, talking about it in very robust terms.
I told the minister and I told everyone what we had been told.
So if you swallowed false information, does that not raise questions for us as to what credence we should give to what you're telling us now?
Whether it's, you are making the assumption it's false information.
Yes.
It was caveated.
Not by you, it wasn't.
Wasn't.
And Campbell Tidkale pointed that out, that instead of putting in the caveat that it was a broad brush figure, etc., you and the minister rushed to simply talk about the 18 million.
I'm not. The minister did talk about the 18 million, and I informed him of it, because it's my responsibility as chairman to tell the minister and the department what we have found and what we have been advised, and we revised that.
You do recall what paragraph 10.16 of Campbell Tidkale said. The problem was exasperated when the figure of 18 million was put in the public domain with no reference to the caveat. And that was no reference by you or the minister to the caveat. So as chairman, you were prepared to put a figure in the public domain without reference to the caveat. The point I'm drawing out of that is, if that was cavalier to do that, now that you're still in charge of the housing executive, should we have the confidence you invite us to have that everything is now hunky-dory?
Well, the board work together. The board are the ones that are responsible for oversight. I lead that board, and we work together to ensure that we actually fulfil our responsibilities, and we are on that route.
And the board, for example, if I was a board member, a much advance notice would I have of the agenda of papers and opportunity to study them, given that I probably would have another job to do?
When I arrived, they were sent the weekend, out of the weekend, before a Wednesday board meeting, and they were that thick. They now go out a week before, and they are that thick. In order that the board members do have the opportunity to consider all the papers properly.
But they're getting less papers.
They're getting more, how can I put it, succinct papers, and they're not being asked to make decisions about issues where there is no context in which they can understand the broader picture.
So who sifts the papers?
It's not a question of sifting the papers. We have made it clear that we have a forward work plan for the board, and that plan is set and agreed at our away days, and the management have to, in fact, produce the papers according to that plan.
I think I would say at this point that, I mean, it's a fair and very appropriate line of questioning, because although the issues at hand would predate your appointment, and we accept that entirely, and we're also labouring under the fact that we don't have the end result of the negotiations between yourselves and the contractors, although we did agree this morning as a committee, we were quite concerned about this, that this is still going on for some time, and appreciated your telling us, so we were intending to ask yourselves at what point is that negotiation. I think you have a fair it's concluded between yourself and the contractors. It's now with the department, so we will pursue that robustly with the department, because clearly we think it's an unacceptable delay, particularly if contracts aren't awarded the later in the year and all the rest of that. So I think what's relevant about this line of question, unfortunately for yourselves perhaps, even though the issue predate, for us we've got to satisfy ourselves phase 2 criteria. The term of reference is about have the actions been taken appropriate. If we have a question mark over ourselves and the way in which Jim's outlined, you appreciate from where we're coming from, because we've got to satisfy ourselves were the measures adopted appropriate. We have a big question mark over our minds because of what's happened through, I suppose, shorthand, the 18 million or the Campbell Tickell report saga, which we are going to address in another meeting with yourself and Will Hurrenny, as you know. So we're labouring a wee bit onto that problem, but you know where we're coming from, to be fair.
Yes, I think we are as equally frustrated that it's taking such a long time to resolve. But as far as the board is concerned, it's signed it off. It is with the department. And it's a matter really for the department and the DFP to go through their processes, and then it can be a public matter.
And have you been given any timescale on that?
No.
And how long has it been with DFP and
About
DST?
2.5 weeks, I think. I think our board meeting is May the 14th, where we formally signed it all off.
Okay.
In terms of more up-to-date reviews, has the Gateway review been carried out?
The Gateway review has been looked at by officers. It's on the board agenda for June. Gateway 5 you're talking about?
Yes, Gateway 5.
That's on the board agenda for June.
Was that done as promised in April?
I'm not certain it was promised in April.
Well, it was. I have Assembly answers which said it was happening the 1st to the 3rd of April, and published within 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, all I know is that the officers have had the Gateway review, and they're reporting their findings to the board with their recommendations in June.
And you don't know the outcome of that?
Not yet.
Whether things have improved or not?
No, I do understand the issues involved in the Gateway review, but it has not formally come to the board yet, because the officers have been working on the report, and they're going to give us their recommendations for what happens next. And we will look at those carefully and see whether we think they're right.
The Audit Office report talked about resource pressures on the Corporate Assurance Unit. Have those been addressed?
I think I should point out that the Corporate Assurance Unit and Audit have a total of 39 staff. I think that's a fairly substantial number.
But the Audit Office talked about resource pressures being accountable for the slowness in producing draft reports following inspections, etc.
Well,
has that improved?
You have them.
The only notified problem, as far as I'm concerned, the only thing that has been said to me by the head of the Corporate Assurance Unit is that due to sick leave, we were short of a quantity surveyor. And we've sought to fill that gap through an agency appointment in the short term, which there was a hiatus because of the absence of a QS. But I understand that has now been resolved. But you know, you can't account for sick leave, can you? We're trying not to overstaff our assurance functions to the detriment of delivery functions, and you know, we're trying to produce a measured and proportionate response to the issues before us.
Okay, Sammy.
Okay. You've explained what you've done in terms of restructuring. We still have I can't understand how a lot of these problems arose given the structures you had in place in the first place. There's supposed to be checks and further checks and further checks. You've now got an additional one, the asset management unit on top of the audit committee and the corporate assurance unit, as well as all of the staff in the district offices. But, and this is what the point worries me, all of this originates, I mean, you can have all of these structures in place, but if the information is just feeding up from the bottom is not of good quality, or indeed, as Jim has pointed out, sometimes even manipulated, when people don't want you to know the truth of what's going on for them. What's being done, given I assumed you had the staff who were dealing with maintenance contracts for years anyway in the housing executive, how did the failure arise at the bottom level, that you didn't have the quality of information coming through, the proper inspections being done, reports on those inspections, and what's been done to address the issue at the bottom end, not just putting in more layers of governance?
I think the answer to that is there has been a much firmer emphasis on making people understand what the processes are and giving them the training to follow them. So that is the position that we have been told, that there's more consistency and there's more effort on making sure that it is all done properly at the front line. I think the other concerns that I have is there is an awful lot of checking. There needs to be checking, but we've got checkers checking, and we need to make certain we get that balance right, so people at the front line are able to make decisions and do the job properly, and have got the training and the skills to do it, and then we have people that can make certain that that's happened properly.
But given that the housing executive has been dealing with maintenance contracts
for 40 years
since it became in existence, why or how did we get to the stage where there were gaps in knowledge of, first of all, how those contracts should be dealt with and the practices which should be in place to ensure that they were properly dealt with?
It's impossible for me to answer to that, because it goes back so far. The experience that I have of it, we do it in a quite complicated, bureaucratic way, and that is one of the reasons that we've asked to have a look at our procurement processes, because they seem to add layers rather than get to the point of good, straightforward procurement. So it's an issue that we have as a board on our agenda, and I think you started some of it in audit and risk committee about procurement, because it seems to me that we've got ourselves in a position where we make it a very complicated process.
I mean, the reason I asked the question, I didn't expect you to give me a kind of a history lesson on how it all deteriorated, but if the problem arose because of failures at inspections on the ground, and then those were hidden, either by people who asked for reports to be changed or whatever, I suppose what I really want to know is, have you learnt any lessons from the past,
yes,
which you're now applying to current staff to ensure that those lessons are not, those mistakes are not made again?
I think there are 2 points there, Mr. Wilson. I think, first of all, inevitably, I think there were difficulties in terms of adopting the Egan form of contract, and those difficulties were not unique to the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. Quite a lot of organisations, in terms of the Egan contract procedures, found that they needed to go through a cultural change in order to actually make the best use of the Egan contract form. It was a different form of contract. It did require, if you like, retraining, but more importantly, a cultural change amongst all the workforce from top to bottom. And I'm not sure, but I'm only guessing now, and it's on the basis of hearsay, I'm not sure that that process of cultural change actually adequately permeated throughout all the layers of the NIHE. So I think that's the first point to make. So I think everybody I know and everybody I've spoken to accepts that Egan contracts were not implemented in the way in which its practice dictated. But there were other organisations who hit the same problems. I think the second point is about the reporting arrangements which we've now got in place. We now have much more adequate processes to actually capture inadequacies in terms of the implementation process, especially the procurement part of the implementation process than we had in the past. For example, until August 2013, procurement risks were not figuring on the corporate risk register. And I instituted an initial, very initial investigation into some of the issues surrounding A, the procurement process, and B, the way in which procurement was used by the executive corporately. And we now recognise, because I think it's recognising the risks in the first place, which is important, we now recognise, accept and take positive proaction in order to mitigate those risks, and that contrasts markedly with the past. I think that the additional point I would make is that, as I said to Mr. Alistair, you know, the one thing you can't assume is that putting in place processes is going to solve the problem. You need to be very vigilant and very proactive and very questioning about the way in which you operate those processes and procedures to make sure that people aren't circumventing them, or simply by sins of omission, failing to do what is required of them.
And very often, you know, people do try to circumvent them because they're dealing with a problem in the first place that they weren't equipped to deal with.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned maybe the lack of preparation for the EGAN contracts.
Yes.
Let me give you a more modern, more up-to-date problem, which I think is going to arise and which will lead to the same kind of issue in the future, and that is, you mentioned procurement. The housing executives seem to have been willing to accept procurement contracts for maintenance, which I'm told anyway, even a cursory examination of would have shown that they couldn't be delivered for the price that they were delivered for. Some contractors are already gone out of business, and indeed you're having to increase your direct labour organisation as a result of that. There are other contractors who are probably in the same boat. How was that not picked up? And what kind of problems do you believe that is going to store up for the future, where contractors start to cut corners, start to try and make savings, and there's some pressure on staff again to go through the whole cycle once more of, well, is it more important to keep the contracts going and keep the maintenance happening rather than to be too robust in our inspection?
If I can answer that, I mean, that's my point about that was the point of actually conducting the initial review of the procurement process. And I said there were two subsets. One is the process itself, and one is the way in which that process is used. And I think it's the corporate tasking of the procurement function which is really important there, because in tasking the procurement function, I can offer you no better advice than my NIME would offer me. And her advice was buy cheap, buy twice. And, you know, one of the criteria that you would normally build in to a procurement specification would be the viability of the offers made by the tenderers.
But these are not all contracts.
No, I know, but I mean, some of these things were settled in terms of the procurement process prior to us, Don being appointed.
I think what I would say to you, that the new routine contracts which you're talking about were set in place before we came. And what strikes me about them is the planned maintenance contracts placed a huge amount of responsibility on contractors. And the pendulum has swung so far the other way with the new contracts. The contractors have no flexibility, which goes back to the Gateway 5 review that we will look at. I think, personally, and we have to discuss this as well, they're too tight. They give no flexibility at all. So it's something that we will come back to when we discuss it at our next meeting. The pendulum just swung from one extreme to another, and we have to get it back in a more sensible way.
Looking ahead, if you've recognised that there's a problem there, looking ahead, what is now being currently done to ensure that the problem which you've identified, i.e. contracts maybe awarded at inappropriate prices or inflexibility built into them, which is going to create difficulties in the future. What's now being done to ensure that we don't finish up with the same kind of set of problems as we did, and which has led to this investigation?
Well, the first thing is we have a contract and we have a contractual period, so the contracts have to run. We do monitor them. The performance on the routine maintenance contracts has improved considerably, but that doesn't mean to say that there isn't a reason to change some of the KPIs when it comes back to the board in June. And equally, it goes back to us looking ahead that when we're procuring future, we've got the best procurement process or a better procurement process, which actually balances these issues out and is less, frankly, bureaucratic than the ones we have at present, a simpler way of dealing with contractors. Because the point I think I made before is for most housing executive tenants, the face of the housing executive is the contractor who enters their home. And so that relationship between the contractor and the housing executive is a critical one to get right.
One of the ways you've had to deal with the immediate problems has been to increase your direct labour organisation. What has that cost you? I mean, I understand that you've had to order additional vans, you've had to take in some of the workers from the existing one. What does that cost to housing executives?
The answer is I don't know the answer to that question in that way. We could come back and look at that specifically. But let me explain. When those contractors went into administration, under TUPE rules, and we had to take the staff on, and after 3 months they became our staff permanently. So we effectively got a direct labour organisation of the size we have by accident. We have actually set up a committee, a subcommittee, to monitor the direct labour organisation. It's having its first meeting, I think, next week. Because it is a contractor and we are a client, so we need to look at its business separately. So it's another point about good governance that we've established, that because it is a contractor and it's our contractor, we still have to look at its performance. So we've started that process off. But as I say, we've recruited external people with experience onto the committee as well as our own board members to ensure that we do manage it properly and we do know the answers to all these questions, but I can't answer directly the detail.
Well, I suppose it would be useful for the committee, though, to know what additional expenditure the housing executives had to incur as a result of this increase in the direct organisation and all of the equipment and facilities, etc., which that is required, plus whatever additional supervision that has then led to.
I can only take that back and find out.
There's just a couple of points there, and then I'll bring in Fra. I'm just dealing with previous reports from the following on from the 2010 governance review, and then at PAC and other office reports. There was, and just Professor Rockwood, you introduced the issue around the QS recently been brought into the agency, but one of the previous concerns was there were too many agency staff, which doesn't allow you to have that kind of built-in capacity and experience that is clearly required. So I wonder, could you just address that for a second or two? And secondly, the whole issue of whistleblowers, because you've highlighted that we can put procedures in place. In fact, most would believe that there were sufficient procedures in place in the first instance, although we welcome additional. But there's always, as you yourself have said, the potential for somebody to supersede all of that or circumvent or whatever. So the whole question of whistleblowers, because this was raised in the PAC reports, if I understand it as well, about the treatment of whistleblowers. So has the housing executive, this is probably more for Dallin, but what measures has the executive now taken to protect whistleblowers, to support them, to take on board seriously what they're bringing to attention? Because that's obviously an essential gain element of where procedures may be going wrong because of whatever someone wants to bring it to attention.
Can I say, again, to our June rule, we're going to have our first manpower plan for a very long time. And it goes back to the point that you make. We've got a lot of agency and temporary staff. We've got people who've been filling jobs at a higher grade for a number of, in some cases, years, which I don't think is very acceptable. And what we are trying to do in that manpower plan is to look to ensure that we've got the staff that we need as employees of the housing executive and not as agency staff, where we can do that. So there is a, I haven't seen the report yet because it's coming to the board in June, but it is another part of our work in order to ensure good governance, that we have good management of the staff by making certain that they are our staff and not agency and temporary. So we are exploring that, and it, as I say, it's coming back to the June board meeting for us to look at.
And the issue of whistleblowers?
Sorry?
The issue of whistleblowers, Donald, that's again, that was drawn to our attention by the, it was highlighted by the PAC and the audit office, the whole issue of whistleblowers and the treatment of them.
Yes.
Because clearly, you can have all the procedures you want, some people still may wish to circumvent if that's what they want to do, or, but the fact is, you know, human resource to bear on this as well, to draw attention to problems which they see emerging.
Peter has got to, you're going to do about whistleblowing on your committee, aren't you?
Yes. I mean, we do have whistleblowing policies, as you well know, but additionally, as a standing item on the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, I have now instituted an item on that agenda, which is to have any reports on additional whistleblowing or other forms of report, extraordinary reporting. I can't remember exactly the form of words I used, but I am conscious again that we ought to be proactive in this matter. I think, to be honest with you, I think a lot of difficulties are encountered by especially large organisations like the Housing Executive by being reactive rather than proactive. And I think the more you can do to anticipate and deal with issues before they become problems, the better. That's been my philosophy for a long time, and as you know, I've sat on other large public bodies' audit and risk committees, and I currently chair another audit and risk committee in a £280 million a year public body, and I do truly believe that we need to be driving by looking through the windscreen rather than trying to drive forward by looking through the rear view mirror. And for me, that's the appropriate model that we should be taking. I'm not ignoring the issues of the past, Mr. Wilson. I know there are issues that we still need, historic issues that we still need to close. And we talked today about the maintenance contracts. But if you like, my primary driver would be that we ought to be putting in place procedures which are robust and which do address the issues and which don't assume that everything's rosy in the garden until we've actually got the assurance that it is rosy in the garden. And if it's not rosy enough, we make it rosier. So in other words, I want to see risks going from red to amber to green. And I want to see, but I don't want to just to do that with a set of coloured pencils. I want clear, well-argued mitigating measures and actions which actually give me the confidence and the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee the confidence to say to the board, we can give you that assurance. That is an important defence for the organisation as a whole. It's not sort of an act of faith. It is making sure that we adhere to best established practice in public sector bodies.
I mean, I do appreciate that, and again, you're going to some length to demonstrate the additional measures and so on that you're taking. You yourself has acknowledged that, notwithstanding that all of that, there may well still be problems. It has in the past been said that the Housing Executive was not very supportive or tolerant of people who were whistleblowing. And we had John McVeigh, I think, in here in a very recent evidence session, who certainly from my recollection was indicating that staff members were actually highlighting problems, but they weren't going anywhere.
Yep.
Now, that doesn't give me confidence unless somebody's able to tell me that whistleblowing is respected, is treated properly, people are given support, they are tolerated, not only tolerated, supported and encouraged, in fact, and that best practice is used. So, I mean, we're looking at assurance on that aspect as well.
I think this is almost a sort of credibility issue here in terms of a newly appointed Vice Chair becoming Chair of Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, moving into an organisation and saying everything in the House is rotten. Let's change it all tonight. Please believe me, it will be better tomorrow. I certainly didn't adopt, neither was I encouraged by Donald to adopt that approach. But what we've done is a stepwise, measured approach to improving A, the procedures, B, the implementation of those procedures in the organisation as a whole. And that's why now, this quarter, I've introduced that new item as a standing item on the agenda of the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, so that I'm not saying I'm going to encourage whistleblowing, but I am going to take it seriously. I do take it seriously. And I think an organisation that doesn't take whistleblowing and other lesser forms of internal or external additional information provision seriously is actually failing in its duty. It's as simple as that. I don't regard whistleblowers as somebody to be ignored. I regard whistleblowers as a necessary part of good governance.
Okay. Sure,
I'll be brief. and it goes back, you spoke earlier on about the Egan contracts, and I remember when the whole discussion of the Egan contracts were taking place, there were some people in the voice that this, what they call this new way of doing things, was actually, and I think you touched on it, was getting the thing on the cheap.
The danger is that you get things, you go for the cheapest.
Well, I think that's it. Rather than quality, you were going for quantity in many ways and trying to push the thing. And I think there was people that actually had been sent at the time that had difficulties, and even a lot of the contractors at that time were saying that they couldn't meet the demands that were being made of them. And so therefore, it bred that wee thing there that people were getting low to try, and I think even within the past 18 months we dealt with stuff. But saying like Sammy touched on it there, where contractors were getting 30% below the rate that would have been acceptable, and their contracts were being accepted. And like one of the last batches of the contractors that went bust, one of them was 30% below. And yet other contractors were only saying it's impossible to do it for that. Yet I can't understand how within an organisation like a housing executive, in the first instance, that questions weren't raised on that. And secondly, within the department who has an overseeing role, but had nobody called on that that was the case. And would you be confident that all those processes, all those difficulties that were in existence a year ago, 18 months ago, can no longer happen? And then if you're looking at a contract, I always thought that if somebody bid 30% below a contract, you've done an investigation into the ability of them as to be able to deliver the contract at that thing. But that obviously didn't happen. So are all contracts that are applied now, is there an investigation done into the ability of them to do that? And if not, that they're not accepted because the contract is low?
I think the answer to that is, I think, yes. The contract...
Yes, to what part of it?
Sorry, about checking on contract. I mean, it's a bit difficult for us because it was an inheritance. I mean, that these contracts were let at those prices. But, you know, from my experience in housing management and maintenance, you would worry immediately if someone is bidding low, because once they bid that low and they can't deliver, you're failing your tenants. So, you know, it's something now that we are very conscious of, because in a sense we've got members of the board, Peter and I, who had that experience of social housing, about what you require from your contractors, and you need to give them a reasonable price, and you want to have a good relationship that makes certain that tenants get the work done of good quality. So yes, we are aware of it. At the moment, there aren't more contracts to let, so it's not an immediate issue, but it is on our radar. The whole procurement process, as I keep mentioning, would cover that.
Yeah, I think but it is an issue insofar as the same problems that arose with the last lot of contracts could start arising again, where as contractors are forced to cut corners, and maintenance officers are forced to turn a blind eye to that rather than not have the work done, and then reports are fudged to hide that I mean, we could get through this whole cycle again, so the point I was asking, what steps have you got in place, if you've assessed that as a risk, to make sure that it's identified quickly?
Well, we will have the opportunity at the June board to look at the Gateway 5 review, which it covers the routine maintenance and these contracts. And it is an issue that's in our minds about how we proceed on that. So, you know, it is a contract, so there is a limit to what we can do outside the contractual terms. But clearly, we want an effective working relationship that gets the work done for tenants.
Yes. And which doesn't cause us to have to default then to a more expensive or potentially more expensive arrangement in order to fulfil that relationship that we have with tenants. I mean, tenants deserve the service they're paying for. And I think we're very clear-minded that we need to provide that service. And I think, Mr. McKenna, you're absolutely right to remind me of buy cheap, buy twice is a very good maxim. And if it looks as though people are buying work by underbidding, then it's probably right that they are buying work by underbidding. But the Egan contracts, when they were first instituted, were not well understood. I mean, as I said before, not just in Northern Ireland. I mean, a lot of housing associations and local authorities elsewhere in the United Kingdom had the same difficulties with Egan contracts.
I just want to make one point, and I think the big problem was that in England they'd already learned that there was serious problems. That they still went ahead with the contracts here.
Yes, and I mean, if you go and ask Sir John Egan the question about is this what you intended, he'll say absolutely not, because he was looking for a new system of contracts which would actually be better for all parties involved by reducing unnecessary bureaucracy. And what you ended up with was people not understanding the fundamental philosophy of working in partnership to deliver the best deal for tenants. And you know, I've had those discussions with John Egan in the past, and I mean, he would stand by his guns in terms of it was the misapplication that was the problem, not the contract itself, philosophically.
I know we're about to wrap because you need to go and get your flight, but I mean, I just have a wee note of caution in my mind around some of these things, because in a previous briefing to the committee, I think Jerry Flynn made the point when we were dealing with contracts and staff and shifted through the DLO and all the rest of that, one of the issues, if I remember correctly, I think Jerry gave the example that they were using the monitoring the work going through the DLO to check that the prices being quoted and quoted for and tendered for were actually appropriate. And if I remember correctly, Jerry was telling me that they're satisfied that they were. So that flags up at me.
Well, our new DLO committee will check that.
Yeah.
I mean, as I say, it's been set up, it meets first time.
I don't want to misrepresent Jerry, but that's my very clear recall of the kind of conversation we had. So, just I mean, I'm putting that on the record for your attention.
Yeah. I think occasionally you do find in procurement systems that people significantly underbid the average amongst the tenderers. And I think sometimes, occasionally, by subjecting that particular bid to intense scrutiny, you actually discover that they've got a radically different way of delivering the service for which they've tendered, which can work. Now, I've got a really good example recently of that, but that is the exception rather than the rule. The normal rule is caution, I think, if you find that people are underbidding.
Okay. There's no other members indicating to speak this afternoon, so Donald or Peter, is anything else you want to add?
I just want to emphasise that we are on a journey, we are making changes, we are very concerned about good governance, and that we move the housing executive into a better place in everyone's eyes, so that we are delivering services to tenants, and we have the confidence of everyone that the housing executive is doing a good job. That's what we're about, and that's what we want to do.
Okay, thank you both. Thank you very much, Donald and Peter, and safe journey in your flight. And thank you both for your evidence this afternoon. Look forward to engaging with you again. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, then members happy enough. Then we move on to next item, which is any other business. Nothing under any other business, then we adjourn the meeting, and just remind ourselves we're going to adjourn until next Tuesday at 12 noon. It'll be in this room again, 21. Okay, members? I think just getting a wee note from Claire to say that we'll send some questions on to the department from following on from today. You happy enough? Members happy enough with that? Just as there's an ongoing attempt to get more and more information around these matters. Okay, members, thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room.